Right, we're back.
Fanfiction, unleash your imagination.
Whew.
Proofread by 3D Phantom. Chapter 23, Aftermath. Izuku grimaced as Recovery Girl kissed him. That was seriously how her healing quirk worked, literally kissing injuries away while also making him even more tired than before. What are they teaching you this year? The second day and I already have 2 patients with hardly any skin left that isn't burned, cut, or bruised. There wasn't much our so-called teacher could do from a distant monitoring room, especially when the school does nothing to vet its students before making them battle each other. While I agree with questioning how some of the classes are run around here, not many who manage to enter UA hold such a negative view of it. I didn't come here because I like the school, Izuku said, and everything I have seen so far hasn't exactly changed that. I see. Well, it seems you didn't seriously break anything, but I am a little worried about the hit you took. Concussion or other hidden head trauma are still a possibility. Wouldn't your quirk treat that too? Possibly, but it has limits. You should already feel the stamina drain. Also, the brain is quite a complex and finicky thing. Never can be too sure about injuries to the head. It is probably nothing, but to be sure it would be best if you weren't alone for 24 hours. Is there someone who can stay with you overnight? I live a. Izuku started, but stopped to smile. Yes. I think I can arrange that. Now if you don't get any new symptoms by this time tomorrow everything should be okay, but come to me or visit a hospital if you notice anything. You really should be more careful with quirks you have no experience of. Yeah, well it is kind of hard to get any practice on many quirks. There aren't many people who would offer their quirk for practice. The only one I've gotten to keep came from a villain. I can take quirks, not copy them. I know how your quirk works. As the nurse, I am expected to know how students' bodies work in case it impacts their medical needs. You'd be surprised how much even the simplest mutation can impact a person's treatment. I'm not so old I would mix your and Monoma's quirks. Monoma's? Izuku asked. You haven't met him yet? I guess they put him in a different class. He's another new hero course student. Apparently, he can temporarily copy other people's quirks. Izuku did his best to maintain a neutral expression. The quirk copier was indeed at UA. His father would be happy. Izuku briefly wondered what kind of person this Monoma was. There were some, even if few, people at UA he'd rather not take quirks from, so he'd have to find a chance to test Monoma's personality. Since Monoma wasn't in Izuku's class, he had to be on the other hero class 1B. Izuku wondered what kind of opportunities there would be to make contact with them. Did the 2 classes have common lessons or training? Well, I have done what I can right now. There's a shower so you can wash out the blood and whatever else you have gotten on yourself. Be careful. The freshly healed parts of your skin can still be sensitive. And please change clothes. I'm sure some of the girls wouldn't mind, but most people would not consider that an appropriate attire. I will. Thank you, Izuku said, blushing a bit at the last comments, and got up. He grabbed his bag with his school clothes and headed to the bathroom adjacent to the nurse's office. Taking off the hero costume, it didn't even feel like a piece of clothing anymore. He'd need to get tougher fabric for the next one. He took a moment to check on himself in the mirror. Any injuries that would have been visible once he got properly dressed had been healed by Recovery Girl's quirk, with only some red tint, dust, and drying blood left on his skin. He let the regeneration quirk out of the cage he had forced it into and soon felt much better and fresher, not even as tired as he had been before. Headache and dizziness he had started developing also disappeared. At least Recovery Girl had been competent in her diagnosis, but since he couldn't tell people about his quirk-enhanced healing, he still had an excuse to have a sleepover. Combining the rapid healing with a shower, and he was like a new man, as if the day's training had never happened, at least physically. A dark part of his mind couldn't help but wonder how long it would take Bakugo to feel as good. He shoved his ruined hero costume into his backpack and headed out. He still should have had time to catch the last match. He stepped into the corridor only to meet Aizawa leaning onto the wall outside the nurse's office. He looked even more tired than usual, if that was possible. "Are you feeling all right?" the hobo-looking teacher asked. "Pretty much," Izuku said and paused. "Recovery girl thinks I shouldn't be alone till tomorrow. How are you going to arrange that, living alone?" Izuku stopped. "How do you know that?" Aizawa turned to face him and sighed. "I was briefed by Principal Nizu before the school started," he said and paused for a moment. "I won't lie to you, many people are concerned for your quirk's potential for evil." Izuku looked at him for a moment and continued walking. "Right. Blowing people up is all okay, but being even able to threaten their quirks. We both know it is not just that, or at least I hope you do. There are definite biases coloring people's views of your quirk, but that does not change the potential power it could grant you, which exceeds pretty much any other quirk. So, either I am too powerless or have too much power to be treated with basic human decency. Don't try to teach me about biases. Maybe, but sometimes biases have reasons, good or not. In this specific case," Aizawa paused. "There has been one other person who could do what you can." He was really going to talk about it? Izuku tensed. He could have feigned ignorance, but Tinya and Hitachi already knew that he knew about the man. Izuku sighed and prayed he wasn't being incredibly stupid. "Are you going to tell me about All for One?" This time it was Aizawa's turn to stop and face Izuku, who didn't return the gesture, finding the floor ahead of him much more interesting. "How do you know that name?" "I suddenly got a quirk unlike anything I had ever heard of that everyone hated," Izuku said after a few seconds. "I spent months trying to find anything about any similar quirks to prove them wrong." He paused. "Wasn't exactly happy about what I found. I think some part of me believed they were right. Then me and Tinya had to do a history assignment on him at Tsume. At least by then I had the Dragon Blade and people didn't know about my real quirk. If they did, it might have been worse than Aldera after that." "I see," was all that Aizawa said. They were quiet for a moment. "So, the principal fears I could be another All for One and somehow knows how I live. He and All Might had an investigation on you after you met Nizu last year. They shared basics with me before the semester started. Sounds like violation of privacy. Should I call my father's lawyers again?" "I wouldn't recommend doing that. As registered heroes they have certain investigative authority and I doubt your father's influence exceeds them. I doubt they want me to know any of this, so why are you telling me?" Aizawa put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Izuku shuddered, but resisted the instinct to react violently like with all might. Aizawa gently pushed him forward. They started walking again. "Because I agree with them you could be a dangerous villain," Aizawa said, and Izuku tensed. "I simply disagree on the reason. You aren't the first one to suffer for how people view your quirk. Unfortunately, that shows in the crime statistics. At least to a degree those biases are a self-fulfilling prophecy. The difference is that unlike most of them you will most likely have the power to change this country, for better or worse. Which one depends on you. And that is why you are telling me all this." Aizawa sighed. "No one is born a villain any more than a hero. As a teacher, part of my job is to make sure none of my students turn into one, regardless of how they were treated before. If you want to help people in a similar position, you can, but do it right. I will try to be the non-prejudiced teacher you probably never had." Starting with the truth seemed like a good start. "So, Mr. Rational Deception, thinking that threatening to destroy people's dreams is fun, wants to act trustworthy." "It was." "Spare me your excuses," Izuku cut Aizawa off. Neither spoke for a long while until Izuku finally broke the silence. What does All Might have to do with all this? All for One was his enemy for a long time. Of course Izuku already knew that, but how much was he supposed to know? The research he had found hadn't really addressed what happened to his father. What do you mean? He asked. All for One ruled literally a century ago. I don't pretend to like All Might, but I wouldn't call him that old. I don't know many details myself, but apparently All for One got some kind of life-extending quirk. He only died 6 years ago in a fight with All Might. Izuku struggled to contain the rage bubbling within himself. Midoriya. Figures he would have killed the only other person with the same quirk. If you are wondering if you could have learned more about your quirk, don't bother. All for One wasn't someone you'd want to meet. If Aizawa had only known. You don't have to like that idiot, Aizawa said, but it better not impact your studies. Huh. I am talking about All Might. It is pretty clear how you felt about him even before that idiot set you and Bakugo against each other during the battle training. The principal let us know about what happened to your mother. Izuku's hand swung up to grab Aizawa's arm on his shoulder, but the pro hero was faster and Izuku found his own wrist tightly squeezed. It did nothing to the stare he gave the man. You have not earned the right to talk about her. For a long moment Aizawa stared at him without a word and Izuku responded in kind. Eventually he released Izuku to facepalm and push his hair up. Seems I have more work to do than I thought. Unfortunately, there is a more urgent matter. Where are we going? Izuku asked, looking around. Principal's office, Bakugo is already there. I expect the two of you to not kill each other while we discuss what happened during the training. You are the ones that allowed him into UA in the first place. Does this school actually care about anything but a person's fighting talent and quirk? There is a background check process with police and previous schools' records actually. Both of you came out clean. You actually trust the previous schools to tell you the truth, Aldera especially. When was the last time any school told you anything that got a student refused? Aizawa looked at Izuku, a question in his eyes. Having a student go to UA, let alone the hero course, is one of the most prestigious achievements a school can have. Why would they give that up just because said student is a violent bully with anger management issues and an ego so big the neighbors complain about the shade? Especially when most of the bullying for years was targeted at a useless quirkless kid and then someone who everyone feared anyway. But I guess UA can't be expected to figure that out before putting people in combat training with potentially deadly quirks. You are too busy investigating people whose quirk the principal doesn't like. Then that should be corrected. Bit late for that. You should have expelled him as soon as he tried to attack Toshi, at the latest. Toshi? Aizawa asked. Hitachi Shinso, Izuku clarified. If you think those actions went unnoticed, you are wrong. Not every matter is dealt with in front of the students. Today, however, the principal wants to hear from everyone involved. Aizawa stopped as he spoke and Izuku realized they were standing in front of the principal's office. One more thing, Aizawa said more quietly than before. I am not supposed to tell you many of the things I did, so keep quiet. It saves both of us trouble. Once Izuku nodded, Aizawa knocked and opened the door. Izuku wasn't sure whether to frown or smile as he entered since Bakugo was present, but so were Tinya, Hitachi, and Tokoyami, still in their hero costumes, seated on a sofa on the side of the room opposite Bakugo. Principal Nizu was sitting behind his desk and gestured at Izuku to step in. I am glad to see you looking so healthy. Are you feeling fine? Still aching, Izuku lied. Recovery girl thinks there could still be a risk of concussion or something. She doesn't want me to be alone before tomorrow. Have to ask someone to come visit. He was speaking in a tone suggesting this was a bad thing, but at the end he glanced at Tinya and Hitachi, who showed a discreet thumb up. He barely reached the sofa and was sitting between the two when Bakugo, whose arm was in a sling, blinked and seemed to notice his presence. "Give back my quirk." Izuku froze for a moment, then turned as a tired expression made its way on his face. Fears of the past were gone. Bakugo was standing on the other side of the room. His eyes were empty and his ever-present arrogance had been covered by a strong tint of desperation. Still, his hands were up and open in the exact way as when he was prepared to use his explosions or threaten Izuku with them. Even now Izuku could imagine small explosions sparkling on those hands despite the power of that quirk flowing within his own body now. "He stole my quirk. Make him give it back. No, expel that villain." "Bakugo," Nizu said with a threat in his voice that was unbecoming of his small stature. The word expel is relevant to this discussion, but not when it comes to Midoriya. Bakugo stared at the principal for a moment, surprise in his eyes, but it quickly reverted to confusion and there was an increasingly angry tone in his voice as he spoke. "He stole my quirk. I can't be without my quirk. I used mine in an exercise where use of quirks was explicitly allowed," Izuku said, "and you lost the privilege of me caring how you feel over the past decade. Give it back." There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Nizu called. Present Mike opened the door and stepped aside to let a fuming Mitsuki Bakugo inside. "What did you do now, you brat?" She hit the younger Bakugo on the head as soon as she got close enough. Izuku barely held back a smirk. Izawa on the other hand rubbed his forehead in disappointment, or perhaps he was now just expecting to have more work to do. "I did nothing. Bakugo." My quirk first appeared when Bakugo decided he needed a punching bag to vent his frustration for not getting a high enough score in an exam, Izuku said, and for the first time met Mitsuki's eyes. Something about how if he had to put up with his mother's reaction, I should also suffer. Of course, I was the villain for accidentally taking the star student's quirk. I guess I should have thrown a jar of nitroglycerin at him instead and it would have all been okay. At least that's what everyone seemed to think about him. There was a long silence. Mitsuki was visibly shaking as she kept looking at her son and Izuku several times, as if unsure who to be angry at. "Principal," Izawa said suddenly, "don't you find it curious that while Midoriya's first use of his quirk were clearly recorded, the other things he has described never came up in school records during Bakugo's pre-admission background check?" "I do." Young Ida and Shinso brought up the same concern, although they can only provide second-hand information. Nizu looked at Izuku. "Anything they have said is the truth," Izuku said. "They know more about Bakugo's villainy than his own mother." "How dare you say that? How would they know anything about my Katsuki?" Izuku stared at her for a long time. The silence was only interrupted by the younger Bakugo's angry huffs. "Let's just say my father jokes about how much money he has saved on therapy thanks to them," Izuku responded. "Ahem," Nizu interrupted the following silence. "While this is a most serious matter, we cannot take formal action on it until a proper re-background check is conducted." "Formal action?" Mitsuki asked. "Being a hero is not just about the physical ability to do the job," Izawa said. "We teach combat skills and quirk use that could easily be used to kill. Filtering out unstable or overtly violent people is a key part of the admission process that overrules any other grade or exam, or at least it is supposed to. Reconducting the background check automatically renders your son's admission to our school probationary until a new admission decision can be made based on the results," Nizu said. Both Bakugos stared at the principal in shock. "Of course, that is a separate matter from today's and yesterday's events." "Yesterday's?" Mitsuki asked. Her loud anger was gone and her voice a little more than a whisper. "Izawa," Nizu said. "During his first 2 days at this school your son has caused disturbances in class, made illegal threats and physically attacked or attempted to attack classmates on more than one occasion, and I had to personally restrain him and erase his quirk to stop an assault on Shinso here." "That vil!" Bakugo shouted. "Shut up!" Izawa responded. Today he completely refused to cooperate with his teammate, disregarded the goals of the training scenario, seemingly only interested in injuring Midoriya, continued fighting even after being defeated according to the rules of the exercise, and in doing so used clearly excessive and potentially deadly force against the direct order of a teacher, causing not only significant property damage, but high risk of injury or death to himself and no less than 3 classmates, Midoriya especially. Several of the actions I have listed qualify as not mere breaking of school rules or bullying, but prosecutable crimes, potentially including attempted first-degree murder. You bet they are, Izuku muttered in the following stunned silence. After a few seconds Aizawa continued. After his actions yesterday, I recommended to the principal to not proceed with expulsion or other similarly severe actions, as I thought we could offer him the proper and unbiased guidance he has clearly not received before at school or otherwise. Considering today's events and the new revelations of his past, I now retract that recommendation. My responsibility as teacher is to guide and protect my students. It is not part of my job to monitor violent criminals or teach such people combat skills. You have to be kidding. Just because Midoriya has had issues with Katsuki and his friends obviously speak for him, that doesn't. Miss Bakugo, Nizu interrupted. While your son's past actions are currently only his word against Midoriya's, his actions in this school have numerous witnesses including Mr. Aizawa along with video recordings. As for today's training, there is plenty of evidence to justify both disciplinary hearing and for safety of the students a suspension until said hearing can decide on final consequences. Before Mitsuki could deny her son's actions, Nizu tapped a button on his computer's keyboard and a video started on a large screen hanging from the wall of his office. Multiple windows on the screen displayed various camera views, including that of both teams' points of views during the exercise. Mitsuki held a hand on her mouth witnessing the brutal fighting and her son's roar as Izuku tore the quirk out of him. Then she saw Izuku very clearly bind Bakugo with the capture tape and Bakugo refusing to accept defeat despite All Might's orders. I will kill you. The recording ended when Bakugo's giant explosion wiped out the cameras. As you can see, the evidence proving your son's actions occurred is not in question. But, well, obviously, he was acting in distress. Obviously what Midoriya did has a severe mental impact. Last time Midoriya took Katsuki's quirk, he wasn't himself for days. Sometimes he was just staring at the wall. That argument would have more value if his behavior before losing his quirk didn't seamlessly fit everything he did after, Aizawa said. Frankly, you blaming Midoriya's use of his quirk is disgusting, especially since your own son seems to have been raised with absolutely no concern for his quirk's potential to cause harm. I agree with Mr. Aizawa, Nizu added. As for losing his quirk, while I find your son's possession of such power dangerous, we do not have the legal authority to have someone's quirk permanently removed. He would have gotten it back long ago had he not acted as he did. Midoriya. I'll return the quirk once he's not shouting, making threats, or standing like he is ready to attack me. Izuku pointed at one of Bakugo's hands that was down but tense and open, ready to blow up if he still had his quirk. I don't want explosion in my face as soon as he has his quirk back, or in anyone else's. Izuku's voice became much lower and colder with the last part. Aizawa and Tokoyami looked at him for a moment. Aizawa then grabbed his capture weapon with one hand, making parts of it seemingly float as he stared at Bakugo, letting the implication hang silently. Fine, Izuku said and got up. He walked to stand in front of Bakugo and slammed his palm on Bakugo's face with disdain. He would have genuinely liked to keep the quirk and not just to give it back to Bakugo, but this wasn't the right time for that. With the deed done, he took several steps back without turning his back to Bakugo. The garbage fire in question stared at him with venom showing attacking him was an option, but soon he looked at his very much not exploding palm and then Aizawa, whose hair was standing as he stared at him. Thank you Midoriya. You and your friends can go. The lesson is likely ending already, but see if All Might has any final words to share. Izuku turned away without a word while Tinya gave enough bows and thanks for all of them. They walked out of the office and a few meters down an empty corridor Izuku stopped to lean his back against the wall. "Are you okay?" Tinya asked. "You should see Recovery Girl again if..." "It's not that. It's been a long day and now, that. At least the school is finally taking things seriously with Bakugo," Hitachi reminded. "I hope so," Izuku said. "As long as he doesn't get to hurt you guys. That seems to be your central concern and the shadow in which you walk," Tokoyami said. Izuku raised his eyebrow, now remembering there was a fourth person present. He straightened his back, not relying on the wall to remain up. "What do you mean?" Tokoyami glanced at Tinya and Hitachi. "I believe you are not opposed to discuss personal matters with them present." He paused, but Izuku did not contradict him. "Do they know how much darkness you are prepared to embrace for them?" Tinya and Hitachi glanced at each other. "What do you mean?" Izuku asked. "I turned back as soon as Bakugo set off that large explosion. I heard what you said to him and had no doubts about your seriousness." Tokoyami nodded towards Hitachi and Tinya. "Do they know you would rather kill than risk their safety?" "Do you have to put it like that?" "Izuku?" Tinya asked calmly, but with a tone that demanded an answer. Izuku sighed. "Bakugo threatened to beat and destroy me once others saw things like he did." Izuku paused. "Then he threatened to do the same to you too." "Oh, he went there," Hitachi said. "I know what you meant by darkness now, Tokoyami." "You do?" "Obviously. Izuku is a great friend, but there are buttons you do not want to press with him. You should have seen him when some drugged-up thugs tried to stab me. I'm surprised Bakugo came out in one piece without Tinya there." "What did Izuku do?" Tokoyami opened his mouth but closed it again and glanced at Izuku. Dark Shadow even peeked his head out to be between the two. Izuku nodded slowly. "He welcomed Bakugo to fight him, but threatened to kill him with his own quirk, slowly, if he ever came after either of you." Tinya shook his head in disappointment as Izuku shrunk next to him. Hitachi on the other hand looked at Tokoyami with a more neutral expression. "Sounds about right. I would have done the same if I could." "Hitachi?" Tinya gasped. "Wouldn't you?" "Of course not. I mean, I obviously share the same fundamental sentiment, but you can express it in less violent ways. Such dark camaraderie." "I am jealous," Tokoyami said. Izuku blinked. "Jealous? Yes, you might have walked on the cliff above the blackest darkness, but to do so willingly for others, and not be judged by them is camaraderie I have yet to witness." "Hey!" Dark Shadow shouted. "Except for you, of course. Our fates are tied." "Yes, and that better not change," Dark Shadow said and looked at Izuku. He responded with a tired stare. "I am not going to take you away." "You better not," Dark Shadow said and withdrew back within Tokoyami. They stood there for a moment. "I guess we should go listen to what the so-called number one has to say. I have noticed you don't appreciate All Might much. Has he done something to you?" Tokoyami asked. Izuku drew a quick breath, but Tinya stepped in front of Tokoyami. "That is a discussion we should not have here. There are things that are painful and not to be shared with everyone. Please restrain yourself from pushing this topic." "I understand, I forgot your earlier warning, my apologies." "Don't worry about it," Izuku said. "Let's just go." After that incident they walked in silence towards the training grounds until All Might whooshed past them, not even stopping to check on them. Izuku wasn't interested in talking to the man, but one would expect a teacher to check up on a student he last saw injured heading to the nurse. "What was that?" Hitachi asked. "All Might," Izuku and Tinya said simultaneously. "How could you tell?" "I didn't even see him before he had already passed us," Tokoyami asked. "If you can't see something coming in a battle you cannot dodge it," Izuku said and shrugged. Plus, Tinya's quirk is speed-based, so it probably also impacts his perception. The rest of us have to manage with training alone. I know what you are thinking, Hitachi said, and I'm already feeling sore. Just because we need to have a sleepover doesn't mean you can skip on our training. I know, pain first, movie second, no coffee before morning. I got a new fancy espresso machine, Izuku said. Hitashi's expression brightened. I don't think so, Izuku, Tinya interrupted. You said Recovery Girl wants you to be monitored in case of concussion. I cannot allow you to strain yourself until we can be confident of your health. But Izuku started. No buts. We will escort you home and make sure you don't endanger yourself. Izuku stared at Tinya for a long time. Unlike with Bakugo or even All Might, this time he was powerless to fight back. Fine, he agreed, but don't think that will let the two of you off easier. Such mastery of the dark, Tokoyami said and looked at Hitachi. I do not know how your private training usually goes, but you have my condolences. Thanks. If All Might has left the training area, there is no point for us to return there, Tinya noted. We should head to the dressing rooms and prepare to go home. Sounds good, Izuku said. I'll wait outside the door so Toshi can't escape. Izuku made sure to reach his arm over Hitashi's shoulders to emphasize his point. They met the rest of the class near the dressing rooms. Shoji was the first to notice them, followed quickly by Kirishima at the front of the group. Hey, if it isn't Midoriya. You look a lot better already. I feel a lot better, at least physically. Huh. Kirishima wondered as they reached the group and joined them, walking towards the dressing rooms. Don't worry about it. Today has been a long day. Okay, if you say so. Sorry you missed the rest of the lesson. It was so cool. Our class has a ton of strong people, and the rest of the week might be even better. What do you mean by that? Hitachi asked. Well. Kirishima paused when he realized who he was responding to. Izuku's stare hardened like he had taken the redhead's quirk. After a few seconds and a blink, Kirishima continued responding at least. We are going to see the USJ. All Might told us Friday will be rescue training instead of combat and he will teach us there too. Isn't that cool? Fighting villains is cool and all, but saving people is the manliest part of being a hero. Kirishima raised his arm, holding his fingers together and hardened it into something akin to a stone sword. For that last part Izuku forgave Kirishima for his earlier transgression, partially at least. However, thanks to still having his arm on Hitachi, he felt Hitachi shake a bit and he quickly looked away from Kirishima. Kirishima didn't notice as he kept talking. It took a few seconds for Izuku to remember the thug with the hardened sword arm he had almost killed. Hey, where's Bakugo? In the principal's office, Izuku said and smirked as he positioned himself between Kirishima and Hitachi, with his mother and Izawa. That sounds serious, Uraraka said. It better be, Izuku corrected. Anyway, what did you think about Toshi's fight? It was impressive that he beat Todoroki. After some convincing he told us how, Yaoyorozu said. The quirk you gave him supports his own very well. He was simply unlucky to fight Shoji. I still can't believe you could just give him a second quirk, still kind of creepy. That means he can have double the manliness. He will be hard to beat in battle, Kuro. They finally arrived at the dressing room. Izuku stayed outside, leaving Hitachi trapped with the new questions people had. As soon as he was alone, Izuku took out his phone to find messages about the call he had made on his way to see Recovery Girl and his father mentioning it was okay to have friends over, meaning it was okay to skip his training for the evening. Hitachi was the first one to step out though, considering the chatter it might not have been just because of his simpler costume. Toshi, Izuku said without even looking at his friend, how do you feel about Kirishima's quirk? What do you mean? Hitachi asked, but Izuku responded with his "I already know, so don't waste time pretending" look. Hitachi sighed. It's not really Kirishima's quirk, just how he used it. I suddenly remembered the exact moment that guy was going to try to stab me with his. I know it's stupid. Just a couple of days later I was fighting UA robots, but somehow it being a real situation and there being more of them. I think I froze for a moment. Not very heroic of me, wasting all that training only to freeze up at a moment like that. Don't beat yourself up for it too much. A real danger has a shock effect that you can't get from regular training. Has anything similar happened before? I may have had nightmares a couple of times. I know what that is like, Izuku said. But with the issue of Kirishima's quirk, you should work on how you feel seeing similar quirks. It would be bad if you had to team up with Kirishima and lost focus from seeing his quirk. Izuku's eyes shifted just a little past Hitachi. A bit like how he hasn't been too judgmental but still hesitated to respond to you. And how would I do that? Exposure without danger, for the both of you, Izuku responded and yanked Hitachi's shoulder to make him turn and face Kirishima. The redhead had joined them in the corridor in time to hear the important bits. He and Hitachi stared at each other for a moment until Kirishima grabbed Hitachi's hands and started talking way too fast and loud, apologizing and promising he would not do the thing near Hitachi and offering to help. The redhead wasn't necessarily bad. If he could see past the biases of the society around him and help Hitachi, then he was going to get lots of points in Izuku's eyes. Izuku checked his messages again while the scene was going on and more students started joining them in their regular school uniforms. By the time Tinya managed to change from his overcomplicated armor and join them, rest of the class was already done and chatting. Not feeling enthusiastic for any more discussions with unpredictable topics, Izuku started walking, unintentionally setting off the motion of the entire class. Tinya followed closely, but Hitachi fell behind with Kirishima, who had hardened his arm for the exposure Izuku had prescribed. Yep, he got bonus points, lots of them. Izuku's phone beeped with another message which he glanced at and sighed. One more thing to endure today, just one more. He leaned closer to Tinya and whispered. Stay close and be ready to cover your ears. What? Tinya started but Izuku faced away without any more words. They came around the building to the front yard just as the Bakugos stepped out of the front doors. Katsuki had a stunned expression on his face but the way he bit his teeth together revealed the anger bubbling inside. His mother was in tears that could have almost impressed even a member of the Midoriya family, if he cared any more. Why is she crying? Yurika asked. Her failed parenting has finally caught up to them, Izuku said as he kept walking, not giving the Bakugos any more than a glance. That is not a very nice thing to say. I have no obligation to be nice to anyone. It needs to be earned. Midoriya. Mitsuki shouted. Izuku kept walking without giving her even a glance. Mitsuki kept talking, sounding like she was closer with every following word. How can you just walk away after? They just suspended Katsuki, all but promising to expel him after an investigation. She shouted. The class members present collectively gasped. Do you understand what that means? I know he had bullied you, but this will destroy his future, all of his dreams. Look at me. Izuku kept walking, not acknowledging her at all. You have changed since you moved in with your father. You have become colder. What would Inko think? She wouldn't have let you turn out like this. Uh-oh, Tinya said. Izuku stopped. Sparks of fire flickered around his twitching hands. Kirishima, Hitachi said quietly behind Izuku, stand in front of her and harden as much as you can. Izuku drew a deep breath. What? Kirishima started asking. Izuku breathed out and turned to face Mitsuki with a stare so cold even Todoroki's ice couldn't match it. That won't be necessary, he addressed Hitachi and Kirishima. I prepared for this. Couldn't trust the school to take care of things. Without breaking his stare, Izuku raised one hand and pointed at the gate where two large expensive-looking black cars had been parked. One had a single man in a suit standing next to an open door. The other had at least as finely dressed a man and woman standing next to it, with the woman holding a black folder under her arm. Mitsuki turned to stare at the duo of expensive lawyers instead of Izuku and started visibly shaking. No, no. You had one warning, a whole year to correct the results of your parenting. B.A. Katsuki could have gotten away with everything he did over the last decade just because I would have rather not even thought about him ever again. You wasted that chance. Katsuki has not changed a bit, Izuku paused, and he threatened my friends. Tinya grabbed Izuku's shoulder but didn't say a word. So, step out of that gate and face your futures. List of Midoriya's current quirks because it was requested. All for one, public. Dragon Blade, public. Vibration, secret/villain, but most commonly used secretly in combination with Dragon Blade. Super Regeneration copied quirk, secret/villain. Hellfire Arrow, public, kind of. He pretends it is just another technique for Dragon Blade. Venomous Nails, secret/villain. Calm Mind, secret/villain. Fanfiction, unleash your imagination. Odor Sloth, wouldn't emotionless fear be a contradiction, like saying dry water? Proofread by 3D Phantom. Chapter 24, Payback. Izuku watched, his entire class around him, as Mitsuki stepped outside of the UA gate. She was walking slowly with fear in every individual step, like she was stepping into a minefield. She probably wished she did. At least it is possible to avoid mines if you were careful. As she took the first step outside the gate, the two lawyers took a step forward and the woman held the folder with both hands. Mitsuki Bakugo, she asked. Why, yes, usually so strong-willed, Mitsuki stuttered. We are here as the legal representatives of Hisashi and Izuku Midoriya in the numerous cases of harassment, slander, bullying, threats of violence, assault, illegal quirk use and attempted murder committed by your son, along with your own responsibility of damages both physical and psychological as his parent. We have been instructed by the Midoriya family to ensure that all these crimes and any other inappropriate actions are prosecuted and punished to the greatest extent allowed by law. She paused for a moment. Regardless of the costs to either party. You shouldn't need more than 40 or 50 million yen, for the first round of lawsuits. You can't be serious. That would bankrupt us. Yes. Of course, your son won't be able to help you with the costs since his most recent actions have taken place at an age where he is eligible for full criminal prosecution and penalties including imprisonment. Seems both of you forgot that schools and parents aren't the only institutions that are supposed to keep him responsible for his actions. No. In addition to Katsuki Bakugo's actions, the man spoke, the illegal acts and failures of every educational institution he has attended simultaneously with Izuku Midoriya will be similarly prosecuted, though they can avoid the most serious of consequences by correcting their failure to report Katsuki's crimes by acting as witnesses in his and his family's lawsuits. Naturally, we expect these witness statements to be made public along with the lawsuits and records corrected. Your son will be famous, just not for the reasons he dreamed of. Though we don't expect said fame to help with your legal expenses either, the woman added. You can't do this. Mitsuki nearly screamed and spun around. Midoriya, you. She paused, seeing Izuku's cold yet empty stare lacking in emotion. Remains of his earlier burst of rage were still shimmering within, but he would have much preferred to lay on his bed and go to sleep. Still, he felt this was one moment he had to witness, if not for any other reason, then to protect others from Bakugo's possible reactions. To be clear, by Midoriya-san's instructions, we will keep pursuing legal action until your family can't be said to have future or legacy worth mentioning, except as a warning example of where bad parenting can lead, the woman continued. Midoriya-san asked us to say he did warn you. I have to talk with him. There has to be an alternative to all this. He has specifically stated he will not be talking with you, and I would recommend leaving his son alone as well, the woman said. That being said, there is a second alternative. Midoriya-san has laid out exact conditions under which he is willing to retract his legal actions as long as you and your family follow them to a letter. I can read the conditions for you, but know this. There is no room to negotiate. You can either accept by end of the week or spend the next decade in court. The settlement will additionally be enforced by contract fine of 100 million yen if any in your family violate it, in addition to immediate restatement of the lawsuits, of course. Please, what are the conditions? Mitsuki begged. And this is how you destroy a person, legally, Izuku whispered. The female lawyer opened her folder and began reading the first page much louder than strictly necessary if she only wanted the Bakugos to hear. Condition 1, Katsuki Bakugo will leave UA High regardless of what choices the school makes concerning his attendance. The class whispered around Izuku, but they had already heard Bakugo might get expelled, so the demand wasn't as big deal it might have otherwise been. Condition 2, Katsuki Bakugo will not pursue any form of hero education or any other path towards the profession of a hero or any profession, position, or license that would expand his rights to use his quirk. That got a slightly stronger reaction from the class. Yaoyorozu said something about it being a harsh but logical demand. Condition 3, Katsuki Bakugo will not engage in or pursue any profession, position, or license that would allow or require him to engage in any form of physical force or violence towards other people, including but not limited to security guard, police officer and soldier of any kind. Condition 4, no one in Bakugo family will seek any contact with anyone in Midoriya family or people close to Izuku Midoriya as defined by Izuku Midoriya unilaterally. No one in Bakugo family may initiate contact in any way other than through a designated lawyer or intentionally approach within 100 meters of any person this restriction applies to. Exceptions are made only when legally required, such as to attend court at the same time. Condition 5, no one in Bakugo family shall publicly discuss anyone the previous condition applies to in any untrue or negative manner for any reason unless necessary for legally required truthful and factual statement. Condition 6, Katsuki Bakugo must give full and fully honest statements to courts and media as part of lawsuits against Aldera Junior High and any other educational or other institution that has overlooked, covered up, and or encouraged his bullying and criminal. Condition 7, Mitsuki Bakugo and Masaru Bakugo both together and individually will not give birth. Now you. Mitsuki raised her voice again, but the female lawyer had no issue meeting her in a staring contest. After making sure Mitsuki had shut up, she continued reading. Lastly, Condition 8, Katsuki Bakugo will relinquish his quirk explosion including any current or future rights and claims to it to Izuku Midoriya, she said and continued without pause despite the deafening shouting next to her, and shall not pursue retrieving any of the previously mentioned in any way, including any otherwise legal means, for any reasons. The transfer of the actual quirk will be conducted by Izuku Midoriya. Katsuki Bakugo may be restrained for the duration of the transfer at the sole discretion of Izuku Midoriya. Wow, remind me to never mess with Midoriya. Are they serious? I get the feeling they are. For the first time during the encounter, Izuku was nearly as stunned as the rest of his class. He hadn't realized to demand such thing, and it had not come up during the call or in the messages. He was so dumb to not have realized his father would make it happen, the only way to take Bakugo's quirk publicly without legal repercussions. Not sure if that was manly thing to do. In theory that is, in practice that made the settlement contract almost impossible since Bakugo would never accept the last condition. The walking bomb had also turned to look at Izuku and people around him with new rage in his eyes. His fingers twitched and suddenly his expression changed to surprised. Izuku took the risk to look back at the school. Izawa was standing in front of the doors. Such revelry in the dark, very dark. Maybe Izuku could live with the homeroom teacher he got, as long as he wouldn't threaten Hitashi's attendance again. Toshi, Tinya, let's go. I'll give you a ride, he said quietly and started walking. In a few seconds they walked past the Bakugos. Midoriya, you can't. Mitsuki shouted. Condition 4, Izuku responded without even turning. The chauffeur took the trio's school bags and held the door open for them. Hitachi stepped in first. Before Izuku followed, he looked at the lawyers. Add 1 attempted assault and see if you can make it an attempted murder. You read my thoughts, Midoriya-san, the female lawyer responded. Would you like us to do anything else? No, I think you have things under control. Just, don't contact me about this matter today if you don't absolutely have to. It has been a long day. Understood. Izuku got on the middle seat between Hitachi and Tinya, sitting stiff and eyes forward, until the car started moving and got out of sight. He slumped against the backrest looking at the ceiling and the mostly transparent wall between them and the driver. Hitachi, can you press that button and give directions to your home so you can pick up things you need? Actually, can you brainwash me to sleep for the drive? Are you feeling okay? Physically, yes. You sure? Yeah. Izuku fell quiet when the relief of brainwashing took over his mind. His racing thoughts slowed down properly for the first time since the beginning of the combat training. He could feel his head leaning on a nearby shoulder before everything went black. To think there had been a time when he had none available, at least not away from home. He was only woken with a gentle shake of his shoulder and stretched in the limited space of the car, as big as it was. Feeling better? Hitachi asked. A little. Still planning to torture us till dinner? Izuku huffed, smiling, thankful at Hitachi moving to a topic he could easily focus on as a distraction. Thank you for reminding me. Though I feel bad for watching you train without doing the same. Oh no, Tinya interrupted. If Recovery Girl feels someone needs to keep an eye on you, we won't let you do anything more physically demanding than carrying your backpack. Fine. Here's what you are going to do. Tinya goes to hide in one of the rooms upstairs and Toshi tries to get to the sleepover room. Try to ambush him, without crashing through the wall, please. I see, you are trying to recreate today's exercise. It's best I could come up with this quickly. Izuku rubbed his forehead. If there was any value in today's training, it was learning to fight in a closed space. Toshi, keep evading Tinya's attack but try to strike back more. There won't be space to evade for long. The chauffeur opened the door to let them out in front of Izuku's house. He already had their backpacks. Thank you for the ride. Smooth enough to sleep the whole time, Izuku said as he got out. I'm happy to hear you are satisfied as usual. Should I expect additional passengers tomorrow also? At least in the morning. I will come at the usual time. Have a nice evening. You too. They walked inside. I hope you are going to leave me alone for long enough to go to the bathroom. Of course, Tinya said. Izuku went upstairs, into his bedroom, left his backpack there and continued the adjacent bathroom. That was hopefully enough distance between him and his friends for them to not hear him, even if realizing what he was doing hurt. He picked up his phone, double-checking encrypting program was running before calling his father. How was your day, son? You already know how it was. Only what you told my lawyers. How did the Bakugos react? Loud as expected, but they aren't going to take your settlement. Even if his parents wanted to accept it. Katsuki will never give up his quirk. He will face the consequences of that decision. The quirk is the only important thing he has that we could get other than inflicting appropriate vengeance. Stealing his quirk and letting Tomura dust the body is still an option. No, that would just make people suspect me more. Eraserhead already confessed that the principal and all might have investigated me since the education fair probably. Seems he is trying to make me trust him. To help me supposedly. We always knew they would assume the worst and investigate you. Though it is surprising that Eraserhead would admit to that. He is a very unusual hero. Still, this is potentially useful information and it is only your second day. We will find when All Might is vulnerable in no time. Actually, Izuku said and paused to consider what he had been told, there might be an opportunity soon. I heard we are supposed to be at USJ with him this Friday. I don't know who else are going to be there, but there will almost certainly be less pro heroes than at the main campus or out in the open. I don't yet know how UA handles these things. Out of campus training on the first week. That should serve our needs quite well. I will tell Tomura to prepare. If everything goes well, then by this weekend the symbol of peace will be gone and the reputation of the so-called #1 hero school will be in tatters for failing to keep their staff and students safe. What will happen to the students? Or me? Izuku asked. Depends how they get involved. Having people to protect will make All Might easier to defeat. As for you, Father paused for a moment. I wouldn't want you to expose yourself until All Might is done at least, and staying in UA even beyond that might prove useful, so you cannot simply be absent right when the attack happens. Might I present a possible course of action? Kurogiri's voice came from somewhere in the background of Izuku's father. I can separate the students at the start of the battle. This should help us separate the heroes present, and I can simultaneously place young Shigaraki in a safe place. Possibly with some lesser villains, so he appears to have been under threat and can demonstrate his abilities to further his infiltration, though the exact choice of the villains is likely not a significant question. That is worth considering, Father agreed. How about Toshi and Tinya? Izuku asked and paused. Maybe. I think couple others also might have potential to change hero culture for the better. Even at UA some have suffered for their quirks. There was a moment of silence that made Izuku tense. If Master approves, I can concentrate a few designated students into same area as young Shigaraki or with villains they are likely capable of defending against. Yes, you said these people could change hero culture for the better. Quite a bold claim after knowing them for 2 days. Are you sure you aren't just picking people who suffered a bit like you did and feeling sorry for them? I don't pretend to know them well yet, but what they appear to have experienced is exactly what I hate in this society, why I am doing any of this. I don't want to add to it. Heroes are a problem because they stand above everyone else, not understanding or caring about the darkness they help uphold. If people who have experienced that side of things become heroes, they just might make some difference, or at least take space that could be taken by someone like Bakugo. Sound logic, but are you sure your evaluation is rational and not simply emotional for meeting people that haven't so far attacked you for what you are? Remember that they are still out enemies and would not be so nice if they knew who you really are. I know that. Just because they wouldn't agree with why, our ways, that doesn't mean they couldn't have positive impact or deserve to live to try. With Bakugo gone, I'd prefer everyone come out okay. I don't know enough of them to know who are good or not. Also yes, I like people who don't fear me or Toshi for our quirks alone. We cannot guarantee everyone's safety if they are to be a distraction for the heroes, especially since Tomura will be in charge of the operation. So how many students' survival would you like to ensure? Father asked. Well. Izuku hesitated, including Toshi and Tinya, 4 or 5. I think Kirishima would be okay if he can understand the wrongs of this society better. Though he seems tough enough to survive, not that any of them are weak. So 6 including you. That is too many to send to one place if the goal is to scatter the class. Make 2 groups Kurogiri can divide you into. Choose well so the group you are not with can survive some enemies on their own. Shouldn't be too much to ask from people who have been chosen for UA hero course. Also, either Shinso or Ida must be in that group. It would be too suspicious if you 3 were taken together. Izuku rubbed his chin and started muttering about what he knew about each of the people, starting to feel sorry he had missed Kirishima's fight. Son, you don't need to make this choice right now. There is one other matter we should discuss. You should continue stretching your quirk limit, and this attack can be an opportunity to gain a quirk you can use in public. You already have a good understanding of all the people Tomura and you have recruited and their quirks. Consider if they have anything you could use. Aren't they on our side? For now. However, we both know the quality of most of the league members. They aren't going to utilize their quirks for much good, nothing like you can for sure. Many of them are no more than thugs, much like those who thought nothing of randomly attacking Hitachi Shinso. Dad, Izuku said, his voice quieter but more threatening than before, don't even try to use him to manipulate me. But it is so easy. Dad, Izuku said more sharply. Fine, fine. It will not change the point. Not continuing to grow your power is wasting your potential, and last I checked you were struggling with mobility against speed-enhancing quirks, like Bakugo's. Dad, Izuku said with annoyance, replacing the threat. You are growing to recognize your mental weaknesses, very good. Again, it does not change the facts. Choose a quirk among the league you can use and let us know by Thursday so that person can be sent to you during the attack. I will. Tomura won't be happy. True, he has never liked sharing his toys, but sometimes you can't have everything you want. You two should remember that. Yes, Dad. Now, how are you feeling? I doubt you are really in need of someone to watch over you overnight. No, I think Recovery Girl was right to worry about head trauma, but I let regeneration do its work after she healed most visible injuries. Smart. Most people couldn't stay rational and delay their own healing with such injuries. Now if you could learn the same calm rationality when someone else is threatened or getting hurt. Someone else might not be able to shrug off their injuries in a few seconds. Nor would most face the risk of becoming the #1 target for every hero in the country if they make one wrong move. There was a moment of silence between them. Well, I am assuming Shinso and Ida are in the house, so this call should not take too long. Considering all of today's events, it is probably better you relax this evening with them. Tomorrow will be real training, however. Don't miss it. I won't. See you then. Izuku ended the call and finished his business in the bathroom. As he walked back to his room, there was a loud thump. He peeked out of the door and found Tinya and Hitachi groaning on the floor, Hitachi under Tinya. So, you already started? Izuku asked. Yeah. Hitachi gasped. Tinya. I can't breathe. Sorry, Tinya said as he pushed himself away from Hitachi. We do truly require more training in closed spaces. Seems so, Izuku said. He was now wondering what kind of training would help them most come Friday, and just stopping himself from muttering about it was a challenge. Best he could think of was being prepared for surprises, which they were kind of doing already. At least he was a better trainer than a friend. Are you okay? He asked Hitachi, who was just getting up. I feel like after an hour of your training, make that 2. At least Tinya doesn't have that armor on. I don't think I broke anything. That's good, Izuku said. Then you can do this again. Don't focus on just reacting after you notice Tinya. In real life you'll never know where or when you can get attacked. You have to be always on guard and notice any signs of threats. You should be already acting when he starts opening the door at the latest. That's what I tried, but before I could even think about doing anything, he had already crashed on me. That's why you shouldn't spend time thinking in a situation like that. If someone is attacking you, your body should move before you have time to think. How is that supposed to work? Instinct. If you want to be a true hero, the same should happen if you see someone in danger. Your body should be moving to save them before you have time to think. Like you do every time someone looks at us unfriendlily. Why? What? Izuku stuttered. He has always been more naturally heroic than he has been willing to admit, Tinya said, though sometimes more violently than strictly necessary. It's not heroism, Izuku said quietly, looking away from them, more anger than anything, not very heroic. Oh, there is definitely anger, Tinya confirmed, especially when anyone has threatened us. It might be a problem, but that is a separate matter from your heroic instincts, I guess. I'd say he has had more than enough reasons to be angry at things, Hitachi said. Hopefully one less after today. I just have to try not to get stabbed, for the sake of the stabber's safety. Not someone I would worry about, Izuku said. By the way, was Kirishima able to help you at all? Yes, a bit, I think. Help, with what? Tinya asked. Kirishima's use of his quirk reminded Toshi about the thug that tried to stab him, and not in a good way. I think that guy left him with some trauma, Izuku said. I see, Tinya said, holding a finger against his chin, thoughtful. I can see how the quirks could look the same, but I doubt a few minutes with Kirishima are going to help. Then they need more time, Izuku said. Would it help if we asked Kirishima to train with us, or would sparring with him make things worse? It is probably worth doing, Hitachi said. He also seemed impressive in close combat. He could probably challenge you more in that than we can. We should try to train with other people more anyway, Tinya said. Facing Dark Shadow today and trying to reach Tokoyami was a unique challenge. I suggest we try to invite a few classmates to join our training next weekend. Izuku looked at a wall without saying a word. That could be interesting, Hitachi said. By the weekend things could be very different, same with the people around them, and they themselves. Izuku, what do you think? Tinya asked. Izuku blinked and turned to look at Tinya. Who do you think we could ask? I think those two and Shoji seem decent enough to have around, just for the weekend days. Any more than that? Izuku fell quiet. We understand, Hitachi said. No too many unfamiliar people at once. Izuku sighed and looked down. Yes. Going to same classes with bunch of people is one thing, even if there are bigoted people or even bakugos, but training and spending time together like this I need this time to relax without needing to worry about the people around me. I can't trust people after just 2 days just because they have seemed not bad. So maybe we should ask only one of them for now, Tinya suggested. That would be Kirishima, for Toshi's sake, Izuku said, but we still have rest of the week to decide. That works for me, Hitachi said. Now about today's training. Yes, Izuku said with his friend notebook at hand and sufficiently distracted from the previous topic. Try it again. I'll watch from the other side. The duo turned to return to their starting position, but Tinya pointed at Izuku's notebook. Where was he keeping that? Hitachi shrugged and headed down the stairs. Fanfiction, unleash your imagination. Chapter 25, And There Be Media. Izuku leaned back on the car seat between Tinya and Hitachi while listening to the former discussing their homework for the day, despite them already doing all of it together the previous evening. Hitachi was quietly sipping his coffee from a large thermos. How he could drink that much of the stuff and still look either tired or calm most of the time Izuku couldn't tell, although brainwashing-induced sleep had left both of them much more rested than usual. Midoriya-san, the driver said, stopping Izuku from dozing off. We are arriving at the UA, but there is a crowd preventing me from driving all the way to the gate. Izuku leaned forward between the front seats to see what was going on and raised an eyebrow in surprise. Media? Leave us here. We'll try to get past them by foot, he said. As you wish, the driver said and pulled over. As they walked closer, it became obvious that these weren't just friendly, harmless reporters, more like a swarm of piranhas that sucked in any student trying not to be late to class. The noise of overlapping questions and demands alone was so much it was a wonder if they could even get clear recordings of anyone's answers to the questions. Izuku and Hitachi tried to use Tinya as a battering ram to get through, but even so it only took a few seconds for some reporters to push in between them. Instinct told Izuku to throw the nosy woman on the ground like he had done in his fight with Bakugo, but the more rational and calm side of his brain won out. Hitachi had already disappeared in the crowd behind him. Good morning. Are you a student from the Hero course? How do you feel about having All Might as a teacher? After one lesson, not impressed and don't really care what people think about it. That is a surprising answer since most. Izuku turned away from the woman, trying to squeeze past some other people harassing other students. Wait. Have you encountered the quirk-stealing student? Izuku stopped. How in the world did she know about that? Even people at Aldera hadn't made enough noise about his quirk to have reporters chase after him. We heard there is a student whose quirk lets him take away other people's quirks permanently with a single touch. Are you concerned about someone with that kind of quirk going to the same school? Izuku turned to face the woman again and she actually shut up from his stare. Why should I be worried about that? Izuku asked. Because, aren't you concerned for the safety of your quirk? No more than for my life with the majority of students whose quirk could be used to kill me. Just the day before yesterday I saw one student score high enough in a grip strength test to crush a person's skull. He turned out to be an okay guy so far, by the way. So, I don't really have a reason to fear him for that. I see, the reporter said, seriously seeming disappointed at the answer but soon got more determination in her eyes. Have you even seen the quirk stealer? No one in this school is called that, but if you mean the person who can transfer quirks between people, you could say I've met him. Izuku kept thinking if he should give the answer that was easier to him or the one that would give him some chance of influencing people's views, maybe. It wasn't like his face would remain a secret with this kind of media frenzy, and the woman had made him more annoyed than afraid. Every time I look in the mirror. So what is H? Mirror, the reporter started and paused. She took a step back. You are the quirk stealer. As I said, there is no one by that name in this school. The real question is how you ever found out about my quirk? UA is quite strict with protecting their students' privacy outside of the sports festival. His words rang to deaf ears as the reporter's statement had been heard by those closest to them, even in the cacophony of the crowd, and the word was starting to circulate. The quirk stealer. That white-haired kid. Don't go too close. Your words shame your channel. Despite prejudice like yours, he is one of the most heroic people I've met and a great friend. Suddenly Izuku was no longer being pushed on all sides by the crowd, having increasing amount of space which moved with him as he took a step. It was easy to scare away the reporters that had been harassing Hitachi with a simple glare. Tinya had managed to drown out the questions from the reporter who made the mistake of trying to stop him in his unstoppable lecture. Izuku just tapped his shoulder when walking past. Tinya took the chance to get out of the crowd and they soon walked past the teachers, including Izawa and present Mike, who were trying to control the crowd at the gate. Wait. The annoying reporter came after Izuku. Do you feel any shame for stealing people's quirks? Izuku almost stopped, but Tinya's gentle push on his shoulder kept him moving. Hey, can you move? I am trying to interview that kid. No. Get out of here. You have harassed my students enough. All right, if you don't come for an interview, I'll get in there myself. Hey, hold on. A siren sounded, followed by loud clangs as the gate slammed shut. Those people bring shame to their profession, Tinya said. And they knew about my quirk and that I study here, Izuku said quietly. The only time even the possibility of that has been seen by people kind of publicly was during the entrance when Izuku paused, and when he spoke again it was with venom and barely contained rage. Bakugo. You think he did? Absolutely. He thinks he is entitled to always win. After yesterday he could definitely lash out. He did the same during the entrance exam, telling everyone about my quirk. He called me quirk stealer just like that reporter. The only surprising thing is that he got so many reporters to come here so quickly. Not necessarily, Tinya said, holding a finger in the air while holding his chin with his other hand. They were also very interested in All Might being a teacher. They might have come here for that anyway and heard about you just in time. Maybe, Izuku said. It won't change what he did. My quirk has always been something everyone around me knew, but it never really became public knowledge. I'm not sure what this will mean. Just remember, the people who are worth you caring about their opinion aren't going to change, Hitachi assured. People were always going to find out by the time you become a hero, probably at the sports festival at the latest. You just got a bad first impression, and for a lot of people that was always going to happen. Izuku hummed uncertainly and glanced back at the gate behind them, and at Aizawa who was following them. Hitachi inched closer and a little behind him to block his view. Eyes forward. That got a small glimpse of a smile to appear on Izuku's face, and he did as told. I don't need many people to like me as long as there are a few good ones, but that kind of hate isn't just about me. Unfortunately, now isn't a time you can change that. Tinya said. That mob would not give you a voice, or at least not be a fair representation. Better focus on our studies so you can show them later. Izuku didn't respond to that as they walked the rest of the way to the homeroom class. Izuku walked all the way to his seat before he even realized to check on the room. Most of their classmates were already there, but one specific empty seat explained why he had felt so at ease stepping into the room. He even raised his hand to greet Shoji, who had made an eye on one of his arms and was looking at him. Ajiro gave a more careful glance. Izuku didn't bother giving him his time. The rest of the students arrived within a few minutes, followed shortly by Aizawa. All of you probably know this already, but we have one less student present today. Katsuki Bakugo has been suspended pending an investigation and hearing to his conduct in the past few days, as well as an enhanced background check on alleged earlier crimes. Depending on the results of those investigations, he will either return within a few weeks or be expelled. Frankly, it is going to be the latter option. As a part of the investigation, you may be heard as witnesses. I will inform you if that is required. Take this as a warning. While my expulsion threat on the first day was a deception, UA will not teach combat skills and other aspects of the hero profession to people we cannot trust to use those skills responsibly. How an expulsion might impact your personal lives is not a factor. The entire class was quiet. To their credit, Izuku heard no arguments or attempts to excuse Bakugo. Now that is taken care of. Decent work on yesterday's combat training, you guys. I saw the video feeds and went over each of your team's results. For the first battle, Midoriya, you showed more skill in combat than I expected and were able to reach a position to use your quirk on someone with a much more destructive quirk. Do not let Bakugo's reaction discourage you from utilizing your power to disarm villains of their quirks in battle. Midoriya didn't respond. Just kept watching Aizawa with a non-hostile and serious expression. Tokoyami, I understand a sentient quirk puts you in a unique position, but your ability to fight alongside fellow heroes cannot depend on whether he likes them. I understand. This is an unusual situation, but I want you to see a school counselor and see if you can talk things out with Dark Shadow. Reserve a time with him when you can. I will. Ida. You were left in an unexpected and difficult situation due to your then teammates' actions. Seeking to ambush and delay your enemies was a rational response, but you seem to lack control over your quirk. The speed you can achieve will not matter if you cannot stop and turn in time, especially in enclosed spaces. Focus on fine control in your training for now. We are already working on this. Aizawa asked. Izuku already identified this weakness in my abilities some time ago. It shames me that I could not properly address it despite his assistance before entering UA. At least he didn't run through my walls, Izuku muttered with a small smile. I see, Aizawa commented. You should continue that training then. I expect to see results. It was obviously easy to expect things when he had yet to do anything to help with the issue. He moved on to comment on the participants of the next battle, pointing out Todoroki's arrogance and congratulating Hitachi on not giving up and his ability to dodge Todoroki's attacks. Thank you. Dodging Izuku's and Tinya's attacks has been a big part of my training from the beginning. Todoroki's ice did stop me from counter-attacking though. I couldn't even get close. You were still able to defeat Todoroki with your quirk, Aizawa checked his notes. Quirks, but don't let yourself become dependent on being able to brainwash whoever you face. Working on it, Izuku said. Aizawa stared at him for a moment but then proceeded with his feedback for rest of the students. At least he gave feedback to everyone without singling anyone out for humiliation. Let's get down to business, he said after the long list of feedback. Our first task will decide your future. Now what he was planning. It was just the third day. The whole class tensed, expecting Aizawa to drop something super serious on them. You all need to pick a class representative. So, it had been just normal school stuff, was the class collective reaction. A few seconds later people were raising or waving their hands and shouting about how they all wanted to get the post, just to have slightly better chances of getting attention from agencies and the public. Izuku preferred to use his hands to cover his ears. Silence, everyone, please. Tinya shouted over the entire cacophony loud enough to silence the class. The class representative's duty is to lead others. That's not something just anyone can do. You must first have the trust of every student in the classroom. Therefore, the most logical way to fill this position is democratically. We will hold an election to choose our leader. It's pretty obvious you want us to vote for you, most of the class said at the same time. Is this really the best idea? The boy Tinya had identified as Kaminari asked. We've only known each other for a few days. How do we know who we can trust? One of the girls commented, as if that wasn't a problem for any possible way of choosing the class representative. Besides, everyone will just vote for themselves, Kirishima added. Most people will, but that means that whoever does receive the most votes will truly be the most suitable person for the job, Tinya countered, apparently not even considering the many ways of voting to counter that problem. He then turned to Aizawa. It is the best way, right sir? Do what you want, just decide before my nap is over, Aizawa responded while closing his sleeping bag around him. What had he said about this being important to their futures again? I have to get one of those, Hitachi quietly commented in front of Izuku. Thank you for your trust, Tinya told the already sleeping Aizawa before turning back to his fellow students. We shall now vote for the class representative. Tinya, Izuku said, getting his taller friend's attention without even raising his voice. What voting method do you suggest we use? Voting method. Kirishima is right about people voting for themselves. If we just vote for anyone without considering how, and just because one person might get one or two more votes doesn't mean they have the support of the class. What do you suggest as an alternative? There are many options: open vote where voting for yourself is not allowed, two-part vote where we pick everyone who gets more than their own vote for a second round, only voting among people who get two other people to nominate them, allowing everyone to vote for two different people so they have to vote at least one person other than themselves. I'm sure there are several other alternatives. Nominating people sounds like the most sensible thing to do, Yaoyorozu said. It would force people to consider who they would trust and support publicly. I guess that would work, Kirishima said. Is it okay for everyone? He got multiple supporting statements and positive murmurs. At least no one opposed the idea. Very good, Tinya took charge of the process again as he walked to the front of the class. In that case, the nominations for the class representative election are now open. Hitachi raised his hand a bit, getting a hopeful look from Tinya. I nominate Izuku Midoriya. The three of them could of course get a nomination for Tinya. Izuku blinked. What did you say? It makes sense, Hitachi said, turning in his seat to face Izuku. How exactly? I know you aren't excited about the idea, or the attention. That's true. But you have already taken charge of mine and Tinya's training, and it would show those reporters. Even if Bakugo fed them lies, the rest of the class choosing you as the rep would send a different message. You are right, Tinya joined in the realization. He fell silent for a moment before raising his head. Choosing him would be better for the greater good. I too nominate Izuku Midoriya. Not a bad idea, Shoji spoke for the first time during the class. Any other candidates? Izuku asked. We aren't going to force you into the job, you know, Hitachi said. Just think of how much it can help with changing people's minds, and don't even try to pretend you couldn't do the job. They weren't wrong, but the whole thing felt like getting even more tied up with the whole becoming a hero concept. Still, if it gave him opportunities change people's minds. He couldn't really say either way, so the election went ahead and soon Tinya wrote out the results on the display at the front of the class. 1 Izuku Midoriya, 7. 2 Momo Yaoyorozu, 5. 3 Eijiro Kirishima, 4. All right, Aizawa said. Midoriya will be the class representative and Yaoyorozu will be the vice representative. Now get going before you're late for the next lesson. Midoriya, from now on it is your job to take care of that. I understand. The rest of the morning went by uneventfully. The most notable thing was when Izuku glanced out of a window and saw the press still crowding outside the gate. Leaving to get back home wasn't going to be fun. For a moment Izuku wondered if UA would allow a helicopter to land on the sports field. Then it was lunchtime. Izuku had just gotten food with Hitachi and Tinya, when he spotted Kirishima just a bit behind them. Tinya turned to look at what had gotten his attention. You know, if we are going to ask him to join us for training, now is as good a time as any, Tinya said. Should also congratulate him for third place. Right, Izuku said and waited as Kirishima got through the queue. Hey Kirishima, come eat with us. The redhead looked at them for a few seconds. Are you sure? You three are always together. I don't want to intrude. I am sure. There's something we need to talk about. In that case count me in, class rep. They got to a nearby table with 4 empty seats. Kirishima sat opposite to Izuku and next to Hitachi. So, what did you want to talk about? He asked. Are you interested in training outside school hours? Tinya asked. Obviously he is, Izuku said. Have you looked at him? He also got to UA third in the practical exam. Kirishima held his head, smiling. Heh, I guess I did, still a bit behind you. You got more rescue points. That means you did a better job if you ask me, Izuku said. Anyway, we usually train together on weekends and we thought we should train with other people too. That sounds cool. Kirishima shouted, exited. Especially after what Ida and Shinso said this morning. I'd love to get some of that Midoriya training. He suddenly shut up and glanced at Hitachi before speaking in a quieter voice. Is this about your? Partially, it got you first in line, Hitachi admitted. Pretty sure they also want someone they can punch without spending most of their effort on holding back. Izuku can afford to get people with good healing quirks to treat me, but I'd prefer if he didn't need to. Kirishima grinned. I can do that. Just, be careful to not hurt yourselves. There was this one guy who tried to help me train my quirk, with a baseball bat who, well, broke his hand. No one has really wanted to help with my training since. Your quirk lives up to its name then, Tinya said. Heh, yes. It is a pretty simple quirk though. The important thing is how you use it and how well you understand it, Izuku said. Like how much can you harden right now, how deep into your skin does it go? Are you bulletproof or just tough against blunt force impact? How about other types of danger like heat or electricity? Does the physical change affect you in other ways? I noticed you hardened for the strength tests during Aizawa's fitness test. Kirishima said. Are you really that interested in my quirk? Yes, Hitachi and Tinya said at the same time. Oh, well, as long as you don't steal it from me. Izuku's eyes narrowed and his face dropped, losing the slight smile he had had. Hitachi shoved his elbow into Kirishima's side. What? Oh, I'm sorry, Kirishima quickly said. It was just a joke. Izuku's stare softened a bit but he still didn't look happy. Just so you know, Hitachi said, him taking your quirk is the best thing that could happen in training. He was able to help me a lot with my quirk after trying it just a couple of times himself. There is a big difference between seeing a quirk and using it himself. Really? Heh, never thought about it that way. It is unthinkable for most people, Izuku commented quietly. Hey, I said I'm sorry, Kirishima responded, waving his hands in front of him. I didn't. Alarm sirens began ringing across the school as a voice announced a villain threat at the school, calling for students to evacuate. To where or what way it didn't say. Izuku and company were standing in an instant, but they were standing tense and more or less ready for battle, meanwhile most others were either frozen in place or already running. Izuku was mostly focused on wondering what was going on. Who would be crazy enough to attack UA? Besides Tomura of course, but that wasn't supposed to be at the main campus, or today. We should evacuate too, Tinya said, and they started moving. Izuku was the last one right behind Hitachi, but as they ran across the cafeteria, he saw what was happening. The corridor was already so full of panicking students to the point where getting anywhere was nearly impossible. If any villain was actually attacking, they would have been like fish in a barrel. If it was Izuku attacking the school, a couple of the explosive hellfire arrows would have been enough to cause nation-shaking carnage. Overall, Izuku started doubting if they had overestimated UA's security. Preparing students for emergencies certainly wasn't a part of it. Tinya and Kirishima were already beyond his reach, but Izuku grabbed Hitachi just in time before he was trapped in the crowd. Izuku, what? Getting stuck there won't help you get out or stay safe. We don't even know what is happening. Hitachi glanced at the crowd that had already consumed Tinya and Kirishima. You are probably right. What do you suggest? Try to find out what is happening and avoid the crowd. If there is an actual villain attack, the crowd will only attract them. But Tinya and others are already trapped in there. If there really is an attack. Izuku raised one arm with a lit dragon blade. Right, Izuku, solution number one if any of us are threatened. That would work. I almost pity the villains, Hitachi said. They jogged to a nearby window to see if anything was happening outside. At the second window Izuku's eyes widened, but as much in anger as in shock. They wouldn't. Who? Hitachi asked as he came to look out next to Izuku. The media. Izuku seethed and then blinked. How in the world did they get through the UA barrier? I doubt the school let them in. Could they have quirks, or tools, to break the gate? It's possible, Izuku said. A group that large probably has some destructive quirks, but using one would get them in real trouble, nothing like harassing some students. He squinted his eyes, trying to see the gate that was no longer there. All that was left was the frame and some kind of pile of rubble under it, or maybe dust, like the gate had been just shattered apart, or decayed. "Izuku! Izuku!" Hitachi called. Izuku turned his head to face him. "Sorry, I was thinking." "Already trying to solve the mystery," Hitachi said. "Can't blame you. This whole thing gives me a bad feeling." Izuku couldn't respond to that, knowing Hitachi's feeling was completely justified. After a long silence he grabbed Hitachi's shoulder and guided him back towards their table. "Let's finish our lunch. It sounds like things have calmed down, so Tenya and Kirishima will probably return soon." "Yeah." The rest of the day went by calmly with actual teaching on combat and martial arts techniques. The most unusual part was several of their classmates jokingly calling Tenya emergency exit, for slamming in the wall above the emergency exit sign to tell everyone in the corridor to calm down. As Izuku left the school and walked through the destroyed gate, he couldn't help but kneel by the destroyed remains, separated from the designated walking path by police tape. The gate hadn't broken to pieces, it had decayed to basically dust, emphasis on decay. "Hey," someone said, and Izuku turned his head to see the police officer. "Do not touch it. This is a crime scene." "Right, sorry, I was just curious," Izuku said, somehow maintaining a meek tone, despite his growing annoyance. He got up and walked to his chauffeur. Thankfully the break-in had been enough for police to get involved with the press and drive them away, at least for the moment. Hitachi and Tenya came with him, though this time they would just train a bit near Hitachi's place and Izuku gave them rides home. Once home he grabbed only a sandwich and headed downstairs while still eating it. The training had gone a little long, so Kurogiri's portal appeared just as he stepped in the basement. He had barely stepped through and concluded that his father wasn't yet present in the training room when he turned to Kurogiri. "Did Tomura go to UA today?" "Yes," the Nomu responded without hesitation. "He wished to confirm the class schedule and All Might's whereabouts himself rather than rely on your information." "Of course he did. Is he alone right now?" "Yes, if you want to see him, I can take you to him, but be careful, young Shigaraki." "Do it," Izuku commanded, and dark mist encased him in seconds. As it retracted, things didn't get much brighter as he was in a room lit only by a computer screen. Izuku took a single step. Tomura spun around, reaching for Izuku with his hand. Izuku dodged to the side and grabbed Tomura's wrist, squeezing much harder than necessary. "Oh, it's you," Tomura said, like he hadn't just tried to kill Izuku. Izuku didn't let go of his arm. "What in the world made you go to UA? How do you know that?" Tomura asked, annoyed. "Kurogiri, how does he know that?" "I told you to not talk about it." "He asked me about it," Kurogiri responded. Cursed Nomua. "Tomura, why did you come to UA?" "Because of my mission," Tomura answered. "Did you think I would lead the league into battle based on your word about class rumors? I expected you to not put UA on high alert, especially since I'm already there for information. You can have fun with your little friends there all you want. I lead the league, and I decide what information we use to plan the attack. You may lead the league, but father made me responsible for spying on UA. You making them increase security won't help either of us." "You don't," Tomura started, raising his other hand. Izuku lit Dragon Blade as a shield on his free hand. Children, their father's voice came from Tomura's computer speaker. "Is that any way to treat family? Izuku, shouldn't you be training?" "I should, but Tomura decided to cause trouble by breaking into UA today." "Yes, I know. Kurogiri has kept me informed." Tomura gave the Nomu a murderous stare. Izuku lowered his hand so that the flaming shield was between them. His other hand squeezed Tomura's wrist with all the strength other Nomus had beaten into him. "Kurogiri, leave," their father commanded. Once the Nomu disappeared in mist, Izuku let Tomura go and stepped back, his dragon blade extinguished. Tomura rubbed his wrist as he turned to face the empty computer screen. Master, I have confirmed the information that Shirakuro brought, a voice called from off-screen. I am impressed that you could infiltrate UA, their father said, making Tomura's expression brighten, but in the process, you alerted the school to a potential threat that could in worst case make that information outdated. Avoiding situations like this is exactly why we had Izuku going there in the first place. Tomura suddenly looked much less happy. Take this as a learning experience. You need to think more than one step ahead. If you want more information to confirm Izuku's findings, what ways you have to do that, and more importantly what are their consequences, should be considered thoroughly. Yes, sensei, Tomura responded grumpily. And don't try to hide things from me. Kurogiri won't keep secrets from me for you, or from Izuku. Right, Tomura muttered and turned to stare at Izuku. Is there a reason you are still here? Stay out of UA. You don't want me messing with your league, so don't mess with my stay at UA. I have enough to deal with the school and the press. Press? His father asked. The media knows about me, my quirk, Izuku responded, probably Bakugo's doing. I also got voted the class representative. Toshi thinks it makes me look better in front of the media. Turning into a hero faster than I thought, Tomura muttered. Shut up Tomura, Izuku responded. Izuku, his father said, silencing both of them, your power becoming public was inevitable. It is a small miracle you haven't been chased by media and hunted by people fearing your existence since your quirk manifested. For a long time after your quirk was registered, I had Kurogiri and other Nomas on standby around the clock, worried the Hero Public Safety Commission would send one of their assassins after you. If Lady Nagant hadn't been arrested just before, I would have had to make you and Inko disappear. Assassins? Izuku asked. You know that the world isn't black and white. Those calling themselves heroes are capable of just as great violence as any villain. They just tend to hide it better and the public is more willing to pretend it doesn't exist. I know that. It's just. I know. Do not let the shine and noble-sounding words of the so-called heroes distract you from the reality. Absolutely not. As for the media, it might be annoying, but this attention can also give you a platform to be heard. Words are a tool of change and control just as much as quirks or combat ability. Turn this attention to your benefit. Let people know what you have suffered, but carefully to not show weakness. Cultivate future followers among like-minded people and you can achieve anything. One person, no matter how powerful, can only do so much, but a leader can make the masses change history. I may be a few steps away from that. Perhaps, but it is never too early to start. You still have time to grow. First you need to be strong enough to lead with a firm hand. I am waiting for you. The screen turned back to whatever Tomura was watching before. Good, Tomura said. Leave me alone. Break a leg, or two. I might, Izuku said as Kurogiri's portal appeared behind him. Favorite, story author follow, story author. Fanfiction. Unleash your imagination. The superhuman society is great for some with policemen, through yes, just ask UA Gate, think. Proofread by 3D Phantom. Chapter 26, to the USJ. Izuku stepped out of the warp gate in front of his father and the large Nomua. Izuku looked up at the creature and gulped, remembering Tomura's mention of broken bones. To improve you must face opponents above your current level that force you to surpass your limits, to go beyond, as the heroes at UA like to say, his father said, especially if you are going to skip training sessions. You don't even need rest days to recover. I know, Izuku said and looked at the Nomu again. Seems it has recovered too. The Nomu had regenerated the red marks left from Izuku's attacks 2 days before. Its skin was back to its normal dark color. It finished regenerating late last evening. The doctor believes that the sheer heat and vibration of your attack caused some deeper damage and charring that hindered the regeneration even below the surface. There were even some chemical traces that could link to your venomous nails quirk, an intriguing discovery. At least I didn't leave any permanent damage and it could still fight. The Nomu doesn't feel much, so it was still able to move, but a human with regenerative abilities would likely suffer too much pain to effectively use the partially regenerated limbs. You might possess an exceptional counter to regenerative quirks, son. Of course, you should also take this as a warning to not rely on your regeneration abilities too much. Every quirk has its counter. Even one for all? Izuku asked. Of course. The current power of the quirk might be overwhelming, but in the end what the quirk provides is raw physical ability, since All Might didn't have a quirk of his own. This Nomu was designed to counter physical impacts. On the other hand, absorption does little against your or Tamura's quirks, which is why you were able to injure it. You should always know how you match with your enemy. Right, Izuku rubbed his chin, falling deep in thought. It's not just about power, but what kind of match you are for your opponent, like challenging Kirishima in boxing compared to a running contest. The difference being that most people only have one or a few styles of using their individual quirks and physical abilities, only a few types of situations where they are a strong match to their enemies. You can and should build up your quirks in such way as to be an undefeatable match to everyone at all times. Speaking of which, have you considered what quirk you will have next? If you mean at USJ, yes, Izuku responded. The league doesn't have many options actually, but this one person has a quirk called shoulder-mounted jets. From what I gathered, he has mostly used it to get away with small crimes like purse-snatching, street fights and some gang activity he hasn't talked much about. Not sure why he is in the league, but he doesn't seem to be looking for any change in the society. And you think his quirk would serve your needs? It is the most mobility-enhancing quirk in the league and would also let me fly. I think that would give anyone an advantage over those who can't do it in most situations, at least outside, Izuku said. It might be difficult to balance and control, but I am already helping Tenya train similar issues with his quirk. As long as you do the most difficult training away from them. Flight quirks are often dangerous to their users, at least in the phase where they haven't yet learned to use them well, and we don't want your friends to see your bones healing right after a crash. No, and it would be embarrassing to fly through the wall after telling Tenya not to do that. Your agility has developed at an exceptional rate since we began your training. You will certainly master use of such a quirk as well, but not by skipping training. Nomu. After several broken bones for Izuku and several marks on the Nomu's arms, the evening's training was over. Izuku shook his legs every few steps after he returned home. The broken bones and open cuts might have healed quickly, but they left an itching feeling behind. The healed parts tended to be a lot more sensitive for a while after. He ate a quick snack and headed upstairs, stopping briefly next to what he had named the sleepover room before going to his own room. As soon as he finished his homework, it was time for bed. Everything around him was dark and misty, not like the warm protection of Kurogiri's warping mist, but an unending porridge trapping Izuku within. There was movement next to him. Without thinking and unable to control his body, Izuku swung his arm and dragon blade cut deep into the woman. The blade penetrated her body and cut through it as the corpse fell in front of him. An arm transformed into a sword-like blade emerged from the mist, swinging in an attack against Izuku, but was no match to the dragon blade that first cut off the blade arm and then the neck of its owner with a single swing. Someone shouted somewhere, but it was muffled by the mist. Two other human forms stood behind the falling decapitated corpse. Izuku's body again moved against his will and charged past them, cutting through both their bodies. More and more human forms appeared around him, some attacking him, some just standing there. A few had faces, like All Might and Death Arm. Two of the men that had kidnapped him a year before emerged from the mist, reaching out to him, their faces twisted. "What did you do to us?" They were cut down just as everyone else. Many others seemingly didn't even have faces. Izuku didn't have time to be sure as burnt blood splattered on his face and he shouted without making a sound. Someone was behind him. Reaching towards him. He swung his blade and then everything stopped. Finally in control of his body, Izuku turned to look at who it was and froze as he did. Hitachi and Tinya were laying on the ground, dead, deep torched gashes across their chest right at the height where their hearts had been. Izuku grabbed his head with both hands and screamed. His eyes opened and he screamed into the empty bedroom until his lungs were empty and left Izuku gasping for air. His head spun around, looking for anyone. Without thinking he even turned to check the floor on the sides of the bed before getting up to sit on its edge, staring at his shaking hands, still having some difficulty breathing. He had already lost count of how many times that dream had repeated. Him fighting alone in the darkness, killing, constantly surrounded, and the moment he wasn't alone in the darkness even if it was a dream, the thought of what he did to Hitachi and Tinya almost made him vomit. What if one of these days they really got caught up and hurt in some battle because of him? What if that happened on Friday? Izuku wiped the tears off his eyes and looked at the luxurious but sparse room with empty eyes. He got up, took his phone from the night desk, and left the room. He walked down the hall, dragging his feet until he got into the sleepover room. He laid down on the bed he usually used between the two other empty ones. For a long time, all he did was stare at the ceiling of the quiet room. There were no calming safe sounds of others breathing. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision. Izuku grabbed the sides of the bed to not do as he had in his dream. Some of his tenseness disappeared as he recognized Kurogiri's silent shadowy form standing in the corner. So maybe he wasn't completely alone even in darkness. Izuku reached for the calm mind quirk within him and pushed everything out of his mind except for the safe presence of the Nomua. It took time, but eventually he fell back asleep under Kurogiri's watchful eyes. In the morning the first thing he did was to head downstairs to a fancy espresso machine he got for sleepover mornings and made himself a triple dose of the black stuff. It was a routine he'd developed for every morning after a nightmare. Unfortunately, the caffeine didn't do much for him in the long run. Its effect probably seemed like a poison to the regeneration. He filled 2 extra thermoses just before leaving for school. Both his chauffeur and Tinya were already waiting outside. Izuku stopped for just a few seconds to look over his speedster friend. No charred wounds across his chest or anywhere else. "Did you have difficulty sleeping again?" Tinya asked. "Huh?" Izuku blinked before the words sunk in. "Yes, it has been worse since we got into UA." It wasn't technically a lie. Bakugo's and All Might's presence had made things worse. "Have you ever considered getting a therapist to talk about things with?" "I already have 2, but I can't hog them every hour of every day," Izuku responded, trying to smile as he sat on the middle seat. "I appreciate the sentiment, but you know that isn't what I meant." "I know," Izuku said and leaned back. Tinya looked at him for a few moments from the door before giving up and getting into the car with Izuku. A bit later they stopped by Hitachi's house. Izuku was already holding one of the thermoses for him when he got in. The smile the gesture got from Hitachi warmed Izuku more than the coffee ever did. Convinced both of them were alive and uninjured, Izuku dozed off between them despite all the earlier caffeine. The crowd of media at the school was just as large as the previous day, but all of them had either Izuku's description or a picture. Even trying his best, the driver couldn't get past the crowd, so the trio had to get out and walk. "It's the Quirk Stealer. Are you his classmates? How do you feel attending class with someone like the Quirk Stealer?" As the questions started flooding at them, Hitachi grabbed Izuku's arm and Tinya stepped in front of them sharply as if they had practiced the whole process in advance. "Only despicable bullies have ever called him a Quirk Stealer," Tinya declared with, for him, a surprising lack of politeness. "His name is Midoriya. He is a highly respected member and the newly elected class representative of the Hero Class 1A. The last point made the reporters quiet down for a moment. Tinya started moving with Izuku and Hitachi following in that order. They were almost through when Eraserhead and Present Mike pushed aside the last reporters and ushered them past the threshold where the UA barrier kept the reporters out, or would have normally. The pile of dust that used to be their gate was still present with police tape around it. Security guards and entrance exam robots had taken its place in keeping people out. At least the rest of the day went by calmly, with the only especially notable thing being the partially ceremonial job of the class rep. People were fully capable of getting in their seats for classes on their own. Despite the suggestion to the contrary, Tinya tried to give Izuku as an advice about the job. Then the night came again with a nightmare where Hitachi and Tinya got swarmed by villains and seemed to only be further away no matter how fast Izuku ran towards them. Another night of sleeping under the watchful eyes of Kurogiri, a morning quadruple dose of pitch black coffee, and the drive to school while Izuku couldn't even think about sleeping. It was Friday. At least the school had gotten its act together, with robots and police officers having pushed the remaining media further away from the gate and kept the door open. During the lunch hour, Izuku and Tinya got separated from Hitachi, but the brainwasher soon reappeared with a familiar redhead. Surprisingly, he did not sit on the free seat next to Izuku, but instead specifically directed Kirishima to sit there. Izuku, his mouth full, glanced at Kirishima and then focused on Hitachi. "Exposure without danger," Hitachi said. "You are still avoiding people too much, and Kirishima is supposed to train with us tomorrow. Also, he promised to not make jokes." "Yeah, heh. Shinso warned me that you haven't had good experiences of some things. Listening to those reporters, I'm starting to understand. Sorry if I hit a sensitive spot the other day." Izuku looked at Kirishima in the eyes for a long moment, and something in the look he got back said the redhead was being genuine. After all, Izuku had already deemed him worthy enough to make sure he'd survive the day. Well, that was a cheery thought. Izuku hid his feelings behind a yawn. "You already apologized back then," Izuku said once he could talk again. "Oh, right. How's your practice with Toshi going?" "Oh, that. I've been trying to imitate the sword hand quirk whenever I got the chance." Kirishima held his fingers together and hardened his arm. "He doesn't react much unless I catch him by surprise, so it's going well, I guess. It still reminds me of that time, but I can tell the difference before reacting, if that makes sense." "It does," Izuku said and yawned again. "Let's have you two spar tomorrow." "He's not bored with the idea," Hitachi told Kirishima, "just sleeping badly." "It hasn't been a good week," Izuku added and quickly swallowed his last piece of food. "Speaking of which, I could use a nap." "If you want," Hitachi said. "Yes," Izuku responded, and soon everything went black. For the first time since Tuesday morning he was free of the fear and stress of what was coming. It didn't last for long. Izuku was still groggy as they got to the class just before Izawa. Tinya had almost panicked that they might be late for the lesson. "Today's training will be a little different," Izawa began. "We are going to do rescue training." Kaminari interrupted. Despite his earlier experiences with the blonde, Izuku could at least be happy to note he seemed similarly excited for the rescue training as for combat training. The rest of the class expressed similar feelings. Kirishima even called it the real hero stuff. Izuku mentally gave him points for that. "Kaminari," Izawa said quietly, but in a tone that made the boy shut up and freeze in an instant. "How do you know that already?" "All Might," Izuku said and yawned. He was too tired to even grit his teeth at saying the name, or perhaps it was because All Might wouldn't be around much longer. "Of course," Izawa sighed. "Yes, you will have rescue training dealing with natural disasters, shipwrecks, stuff like that, but today's training will be a little different. You will have 3 instructors, me, All Might, and another faculty member will be keeping tabs on you." That information managed to grab Izuku's attention. 3 teachers for one lesson sounded unusual. Was it normal for off-campus trainings like this, or were they being careful thanks to Tamura's little adventure? Even 3 shouldn't have been too bad. The whole point of attacking a whole class was to distract the other heroes. Now, what you wear in this exercise is up to you. I know you are excited for costumes. Aizawa pressed a remote controller and the racks holding their costumes came out of the wall. But keep in mind that you haven't gotten used to them yet, so they may limit your capabilities. This training will take place at an off-campus facility, so we will be taking a bus to get there. That's all. Start getting ready. He walked out, leaving the class to prepare on their own. Izuku, Tinya whispered from behind Izuku, this is where you as a class rep need to keep order. Izuku rubbed his head, annoyed. I assume everyone can get dressed and find their way outside in reasonable time without needing any more instructions. He said out loud. Already on it, Kirishima said, walking past them with his costume suitcase. Izuku got up, facing away from Ida, who would probably have forced the whole class into a useless queue or something if he had been the class rep. Maybe it wasn't so bad that the job had been pushed onto Izuku. Izuku didn't bother taking the empty suitcase of his destroyed costume as they headed to the dressing rooms. He separated from the group at the entrance to stop by the dressing room toilet. He pulled his phone out as soon as the door snapped locked. He sent a quick encoded message and then deleted it from his phone before flushing and joining the others. Izuku, what are you going to wear? Hitachi asked. Your last costume wasn't exactly in a decent condition, unless you like it that way. I heard some girls talking about Kirishima's hero costume the other day, and one of them mentioned seeing you after the battle training. She sounded pretty excited about it. Hitachi grinned while Izuku's face started mimicking Kirishima's hair. No. I actually got a new one made privately. It just came last evening, Izuku responded and opened his unusually bulging backpack to pull out the costume. It is pretty much the same as the last one, but should be more durable, especially against fire. You got something better than the support company had? Hitachi asked. Wait, don't answer that, stupid question. Speaking of better, Izuku said. We need to talk about your arm guards someday. Sure. You should also take this. Izuku tossed Hitachi a small pouch like those attached to his belt. What is this? A compact foldable gas mask. You never know when you have to face someone with a gas quirk like Midnight's. In your case it should also help you speak and use your quirk in dust or things like that. Tinya, I have one for you too. Thank you. I am grateful for your concern and help as always. Tinya received the gift and then turned, confused, trying to figure out where in his costume to put it in a way that it wouldn't fall off. You might want to consider an equipment belt, Hitachi said. Or pockets. You could hide closable pockets in many places on that armor, Izuku added. Perhaps. That's pretty cool, Kirishima said from nearby. I never considered having my costume prepared to protect against gas. Not surprising, Izuku said, pointing at the entirely shirtless Kirishima. You didn't even prepare it against the winter. Heh, I guess I'll have to figure that out later. I thought this would last longer. My quirk has a lot of sharp edges. Where were you keeping that? Huh? Izuku asked, looking up from his notebook. Sorry, I've been taking notes to plan tomorrow's training. Cool. I can't wait. Hey, what are you talking about? Kaminari asked. Oh, they invited me to get some of that Midoriya training this weekend. Cool, can I come? Shiro asked. No, Izuku said and turned away from them. Please forgive his rudeness, Tinya hurried to say. We thought it best to not have too many people we don't know well yet. These weekend training sessions are quite important to us. There was a short silence and Izuku could feel eyes in the back of his neck. Oh, that is okay. I hope you have fun. Don't lose your quirk, Kirishima. He's not careful enough to do that, Ajiro said. There was a long silence. Dude, you should know that isn't cool. Midoriya doesn't like it, especially with how those reporters come after him, and why should I be careful, Kirishima said. Midoriya is cool. Had anyone ever said that before? Izuku wasn't sure. After that they got their clothes changed in silence before heading out. The bus arrived soon after most of them got there. Izuku, this is your time to show you can have the bus loaded efficiently, Tinya whispered. Izuku looked around at their classmates. Okay. Everyone, the bus is here. Get in. Tinya might have died a little inside, but the entire class was in the bus quickly. Most gathered in the front section with an open layout where it was easier to chat. Izuku sat on a window seat in the back with Hitachi taking the other seat. Izuku tried to mostly look out of the window so people wouldn't notice the tension on his face. Izuku, is everything okay? Huh? Izuku jolted and luckily yawned. Yeah, I think I spaced out listening to them talking. Every word tore Izuku apart inside from being lies, and no amount of regeneration could heal that. He leaned back and closed his eyes before they could expose his lies. Instead, he kept reviewing the plan to keep people he didn't want dead alive. Kurogiri was going to do his part and Izuku could always command the new Nomu if nothing else, but he didn't trust Tomura if things went wrong, and the mass of criminals Tomura had assembled would attack them just like the rest of their class. At least that was a problem Izuku could punch away. He just hoped Tokoyami, Shoji, and Kirishima could do the same. The redhead was just commenting something about his quirk not looking impressive. Don't evaluate yourself based on how your quirk looks, Izuku said out loud without opening his eyes. If you are here to look good in front of cameras, you should quit and give your place to someone else. Izuku, Tinya said, probably face-palming as he did. No, he's right, Kirishima said. I'm just worried how much my quirk can do outside of beating villains. That is a more reasonable concern, Izuku said. At least it keeps you alive. You can't help anyone if you are dead. I guess that's right. Kind of a dark thought though. The world is a dark place. If you haven't noticed that before, you are one of the few lucky ones who have only seen the shiny surface. Apparently his words had hit a chord since no one talked after that. At least it had been a bit of a distraction. Okay, we are here, Izawa said. Izuku finally opened his eyes again to witness the massive dome structure they were approaching, the USJ, the place where everything would change. The bus stopped right in front of the main entrance where a person dressed like a strange astronaut was waiting. Izuku recognized the space hero 13. So, she was the third teacher, as expected. The class got out of the bus and gathered in front of her. Hello everyone, I have been waiting for you. I am 13. Please come in. They followed her into the dome, and it really was just a single massive open interior space with multiple areas that were the size of entire city blocks. They were standing on a large podium, or a bridge overlooking the entire space at the top of a long stairway. The class was stunned and chatting excitedly not for the first time that week as 13 stood at the end of the stairs facing them. A shipwreck, a landslide, a fire, a windstorm, etc. I call it the unforeseen simulation joint, but you can call it USJ. Izawa approached 13. Hey, shouldn't All Might be here already? 13 stepped a little closer to Izawa, clearly trying to tell something to him and him alone. Izuku leaned a bit to the side to see better. 13 seemed to be holding up some fingers, not very informative. Was she showing minutes All Might was going to be late, or hours or something else? There wasn't much time. Now that they had been seen entering, the attack could start at any moment. Their target wasn't here and there was nothing Izuku could do to stop what was going to happen. He struggled to not show his anxiety and focused on looking down at the different training grounds. He didn't pay much attention when 13 started explaining. There were a series of sparks among the lights that illuminated the large space. A dark swirling point appeared down above the floor of the dome, right in front of a fountain, and then started spreading into a warp gate. Usually that would have given Izuku great comfort, but now it just meant their time was up. At least the thought gave him a more appropriate expression as he stared at the forming warp gate. Aizawa turned to see the warp gate just as Tomura stepped out, followed by the mass of villains he had assembled. Aizawa spun around holding his arm out to tell the class to stay back. "Protect the students," he shouted to 13. Now the rest of the class also started realizing something was going on. "What is that thing?" Kirishima asked. Aizawa put on his goggles, not turning his eyes away from the arriving villains. "Those are villains." The word sent an electric shock through the class and they could only stare as the Nomu stepped out of the warp gate. Everything was ready and in place, except for their target that all this was done for. Izuku squeezed his hands into fists. "Don't even think about fighting," Aizawa said, misunderstanding Izuku's reaction. His capture scarf spread out around his head like gravity didn't exist to it. "What, villains? There's no way they could get into a hero school," Kirishima said, dumbfounded. "Teacher, what about the security system?" Yaoyorozu asked 13. "We have one of course, but if alarm sensors aren't being triggered then one of them must have a quirk that is masking their presence here," Todoroki said. He was completely ignoring the potential of technological jamming or hacking, showing how focused he was on Quirk's role in life, but he wasn't wrong considering Izuku had helped to recruit the person he was speculating about. Todoroki continued. "They attacked an isolated area away from the main campus at a time when a class is supposed to be here. They may be fools but they aren't dumb. This surprise attack was carefully planned with some sort of goal in mind. Kaminari, try to contact the main campus with your quirk," Aizawa ordered. The electric quirk student held his hand against a headset he was wearing as part of his costume, but seemed to get nothing. Aizawa stepped right up to the edge of the stairs. "Get them out of here and alert the main campus." Izuku glanced at Aizawa. Was he really going to go fight alone? Sure, most of the league members weren't too impressive individually, but there were dozens of them just on that central area, and with the length of the stairs, as far as Aizawa should have known, they should have had a good chance of reaching the door before any of the villains could climb the stairs. And yet no one was moving. Tomura was really putting a lot on Kurogiri's shoulders to make this work. Izuku bit his teeth together. The events were beyond his control. Aizawa jumped down the stairs without hesitation. Izuku watched as he reached the bottom in an instant and quickly took down several of the villains, despite being a poor match against large groups. "Izuku!" Tinya shouted. "This way. We are leaving. Don't try to get involved." He probably didn't expect Izuku to listen considering the surprise on his face as Izuku turned around and ran after the class. He couldn't change anything going on below them, that was now in Tomura's many hands, but he could still control what was the most important to him. They were perhaps halfway to the door when a warp gate spun into existence on the floor in front of them and dark mist began flooding out of it. The class came to a dead stop. "There is no escape for you," Kurogiri declared. Izuku pulled on Hitashi's shoulder and slipped in front of him for perception of safety. He had to admit Kurogiri could sound quite menacing, even if he was unable to experience such feelings about his long. 13 raised her hand to use her quirk, but Kirishima was already in motion with no hesitation and charged at Kurogiri. Unfortunately, that put him in 13's way. He hit something and Kurogiri's mist twisted for a few seconds, but then Kurogiri's voice came from within the mist as it took its shape again. "You live up to your school's reputation, but you should be more careful, child. Otherwise someone might get hurt. You, get out of the way right now." 13 shouted to Kirishima, but it was too late. Tendrils of mist burst from Kurogiri at them. "I'll scatter you across this facility to meet my comrades and your deaths." "Crap, What is this? Izuku felt the ground disappear below his feet and he fell through the floor, listening to Hitachi yelp next to his ear. At least they were together as planned. Everything went dark as they fell into the misty warp gate and it didn't get much brighter as they emerged out of it. Wind and rain hit Izuku's face. A second before hitting the ground he adjusted himself a bit and landed on his feet slightly crouched. Hitachi landed on his feet but staggered from the momentum. Izuku spun around and caught him, but rather than ask if he was okay, Izuku looked around, eyes narrowed like a predator ready to pounce on its prey. There was a thump near them. The dragon blade lit and swung towards the direction. Izuku squinted in the darkness but only saw a large black mass. Then a familiar bird face emerged from it. Tokoyami had landed on Dark Shadow. 13. Izuku started. The dragon blade he had pointed at Tokoyami flashed and fired a blue hellfire arrow. Dark Shadow tried to move in front of Tokoyami to take the hit, but it flashed past them. There was an explosion. "Och, put it out, put it out." A villain screamed as the close hit had not just launched asphalt pebbles at him but also lit his pants on fire. "Dark Shadow," Izuku said. "If you want Tokoyami to live through this, you need to work with us. Don't tell me what to do. I'll tear these guys apart." So maybe having Tokoyami with Izuku's group wasn't his best idea. Favorite, story author follow, story author. Fanfiction unleash your imagination. Chapter 27, Battle, Hakonetsu. Chapter 27, Hitachi's back met Izuku's as he stood ready to fight and cover Izuku's back. Tokoyami came closer but with Dark Shadow looming over him larger than before he still kept some distance and focused on the group of villains that were helping their comrade put out his burning pants. "Be careful. He is more powerful and difficult to control in darkness. I'll try to cover this side. I will keep Fumi safe. You stay away. Get them Aya." A group of thugs tried to charge Tokoyami and got slammed to the nearest wall. Izuku nodded and turned to another group of Tamura's thugs that approached on that side obscured by the rain and darkness. "I'll charge against them to hold them from crowding us," Izuku said. "Cover my back and knock out those I let pass." "Okay. Focus Toshi. This is what we trained for," Izuku said and fired a series of hellfire arrows that exploded in front of the villains, briefly pushing them back. He wasn't willing to kill them with direct hits, he hoped. Hitachi nodded, but still seemed uncertain and shaky. Izuku spoke again but more quietly. "Please Hitachi, I don't know what I am going to do if they manage to do something to you, but both things terrify me. I won't let you down." That was all Izuku needed. He sprung forward like a giant spring. A blurry figure with a cobra-like head jumped through the dark rain and spat something at Izuku. Izuku dodged the slow, relative to what he had trained against, blob of liquid easily and flattened the attacker's nose, or snout, with a single punch hard enough to hurt his own fist. He didn't care though, and the pain went away in a few seconds. Another person jumped him but was unprepared to meet someone more than capable of taking him on and got tossed in a long arch towards Hitachi to be finished off. Izuku jumped back and lit his dragon blade when an entire group charged through the rain. Half of a sword went flying, its cut end glowing hot red, a blue flash whizzed, followed by a pistol exploding in its holder's hand, taking much of the hand with it. The resulting scream echoed between the buildings, not covered by even the artificial storm that more people lurked in. Izuku held his dragon blades up as a sword and a shield ready to take them on, but as he did his breathing kept getting faster with flashbacks to his nightmares. A villain with scorpion-like tail emerged from the rain, sloppily launching his stinger at Izuku. It would have been so easy to cut off only the unconscious reflexes honed by his father's air cannon training made his body dodge the painful meeting with likely venomous stinger, and he backed away some more. With another flashback he glanced back to make sure Hitachi was okay. He could only distinguish one form standing over 2 or 3 laying on the ground. He hadn't let that many through. At least he didn't intend to. Something hit the back of his neck. A crack vibrated through his skull into his ears, and he might have blacked out for a few seconds. He blinked. I'll make sure he's done. Go kill the other 2. Many pairs of feet ran past. Izuku! Hitachi screamed behind the whooshing wind, his voice. Izuku's head spun to the side. His attacker had barely enough time to notice the murderous one-eyed stare before Izuku's legs twisted around his, and in a matter of seconds their positions had been reversed. A fraction of a second later his head got hammered between the asphalt and a furious series of punches, and the man took it a lot worse than one Bakugo had in a similar situation. Not wasting time to check on the unconscious man's condition, Izuku charged towards Hitachi and Tokoyami, who were getting surrounded. His arm was already up, ready to turn all of the attackers into wall paint with superheated hellfire arrow blasts before he realized what he was about to do. He aimed down and further away from Hitachi and exploded a large chunk of the asphalt in the middle of an enemy group. Half a dozen of them went down right away, burned and bleeding, and were swept away by a large black mass right after. Hitachi flipped one enemy on the ground and caught another with the brainwashing. At least the attackers hadn't yet realized to stay quiet in front of the suddenly chatty student. Hitachi was still holding the woman he had tossed on the ground when another approached to stab him. Izuku roared and barely held back as he attacked without slicing the man in two. Instead he jumped and did a spinning kick he had learned from Tinya. It hit the attacker, who was still turning in response to Izuku's roar, to the side of his head. The kick was strong enough that the man's feet left the ground and he was completely out cold before hitting the ground again. Izuku didn't care. He looked over Hitachi, who seemed uninjured, and then down to the struggling woman Hitachi was restraining. Image of Yui, the serial killer Izuku's father had made him kill, flashed in Izuku's eyes as he saw the woman who looked just like her. If Izuku wasn't still having nightmares of killing Yui, he would have thought she was the same person. Hands held in place by Hitachi showed long sharp nails that dripped venom. Was she a Izuku's stare alone made the woman stop struggling. "Hey!" Hitachi shouted at the woman. "What?" She responded and was caught by brainwashing. Hitachi left her unconscious on the ground. It seemed like that had been the main group of attackers, but Izuku knew better. He kept looking around. "Are you okay?" Hitachi asked. "Yes," Izuku said, and with no attack in sight took the risk of briefly facing Hitachi. "I'm sorry. I wasn't supposed to let so many people pass. I wasn't focused enough and..." "Ouch." Hitachi flicked his finger at Izuku's forehead. "Izuku, I know you are like 10 times better than me in a fight, but that doesn't mean you need to take on everyone alone. We survived, and largely thanks to you. Don't start acting like you failed somehow." Izuku looked away meekly and started looking out for dangers again as he spoke. "Thanks, but we aren't safe yet, and we don't know about everyone else. No one outside even knows what is happening." "I agree," Tokoyami said with dark shadow hovering over him focused on Izuku. "We should seek the exit and try to regroup with the teachers." "IAG." Izuku said, and heard a whoosh that was barely distinguishable in the rain and wind. He was already moving when his eyes started turning towards the new threat. He leaped towards Tokoyami with dark shadow moving to counter him. A flaming shield flashed into existence and blocked a blade that had headed towards Tokoyama's neck. The force of the impact pushed him back and yanked the attacker's flight path in the opposite direction. A suddenly hot sword flew in the air. As fast as he had appeared, the screaming assailant disappeared back into the wet darkness. He was wearing some sort of wingsuit and glided through the air with the thrust from his shoulder-mounted jet's quirk. Izuku focused on the man until he disappeared behind a corner. "Stick together, he might strike again from any direction," Izuku said. Both of his allies joined him in a circle. The shadow of dark shadow fell on Izuku, who tensed and glanced up. "You saved Fumi." Just did it a little faster than you were going to. No, I was too focused on you. I was going to fail Fumi because I feared you. He might have died. Dark Shadow paused for a moment, then continued, speaking more meekly than before. Will you help me keep him safe again? Are you going to work with me on that, for all of us? Izuku asked. Yes, the giant quirk creature said. Then stay vigilant. You are our best change at reaching him. Watch your side and be ready to slap him from the air. Yes, the quirk said with more confidence. The first and only warning of the approaching enemy was a barely distinct whoosh. There! Tokoyami shouted. Izuku followed his hand, pointing up just in time to see Dark Shadow charge at the flying attacker, who bolted to the side, narrowly avoiding Dark Shadow and disappearing back into the darkness above them. Izuku fired several hellfire arrows after him, the red weaker ones, but none hit. Stay sharp, Izuku said, and kicked one of the villains on the ground that they had knocked out before. She had regained consciousness and was trying to get up to stab Hitachi in the back. Izuku's kick sent her back into the asphalt and unconsciousness. Hey birdie! Hitachi shouted. Too afraid to face some kids head on. I thought you were supposed to be the League of Villains, not the League of Chickens. Did you use the surprise? Izuku asked. I couldn't. I can't focus on someone who I can't see or sense at all. Hitachi glanced at Izuku. Just trying to provoke Hai. The whoosh was back. Hitachi yelped. Izuku spun around. The flying villain was already almost upon unarmed Hitachi with a katana. There wasn't time for Izuku to get in the way. Everything else had already gone wrong. He wasn't going to let the man get Hitachi, whatever it meant for his mission at UA. He raised his arm, already heating the hellfire arrow as hot as possible, ready to turn the attacker into paint on the nearest wall. If the flying villain had seen Izuku's eyes, he would have seen death. Lucky for him, Dark Shadow was ready and faster than Izuku this time. A giant wing claw slammed on the attacking villain and slapped the attacker from the air. He slammed on his back on the ground but was still conscious and tried to crawl back up. Izuku jumped on him, literally, slamming knee on his chest with an audible crack and grabbing his head. Let go off. The man grabbed Izuku's arm and his jets flared as he struggled, slamming them to a nearby wall, but Izuku never let go of him. Me, AAA. The man punched Izuku to the face, but it was nothing compared to hits he had taken from Nomus in training. The man started convulsing and screaming as Izuku's all-for-one grabbed his mutant-type quirk and pulled with no care or consideration for how the quirk's owner felt, tearing it from within, forcing his body to change. Izuku too felt the searing pain as his back started morphing, but he was too angry at the would-be murderer to show anything more than biting his teeth together. What are you doing to me? The man screamed and gasped for air. Making sure your quirk goes to better use, Izuku hissed. You used those swords pretty well, not your first time trying to cut people open? Don't worry, I'm not going to do that to you even if you would deserve it. Just as he finished, the convulsing man's eyes rolled over and he fainted. Izuku stayed on him for several seconds, staring at the man with murder in his eyes before pushing himself up. He staggered back and fell, but only a little before he hit something cold but soft. Hey, Fumi doesn't want you to hit your head, Dark Shadow said behind Izuku. It was strange hearing the quirk creature talk like he did during the day with the deeper voice of his larger form in darkness. Izuku responded with a slight smile and a huff. And you don't seem to be worried about me being so close right after taking someone's quirk. That guy tried to hurt Fumi. He's lucky you finished him before I could. Izuku's smile became wider, though still tired, and he glanced at Hitachi. I know the feeling. Hitachi rolled his eyes. Great, now there are two of you, he looked at Tokoyami. We better stay alive or those two will team up to burn down the country. I believe you are correct, Tokoyami responded. It is a burden but one we must carry for the greater good. It's not like they give us an option, not that I'd want one. Hey, Izuku called, once again standing up. We are still in the middle of a giant attack on our class. Also no, you don't have any options for staying alive or we won't stop with the country. That's for sure, Dark Shadow added. We better go before we cause the end of the world, Hitachi said. Tokoyami nodded and they started running, leaving behind a literal pile of unconscious and maimed criminals. Even in the darkness they were able to distinguish the blackness of the dome's interior wall at the end of the street. Left or right? Izuku asked. Right, Dark Shadow shouted from above, and a moment later they were at the exit, which was an oversized gate completely overdone like many things at UA. How are we going to? Tokoyami started until a loud hiss covered his voice. Izuku had stuck the dragon blade at maximum heat through the thick metal and was quickly carving a shining red-hot cut through it until a slightly larger than a human-sized piece separated from the rest of the gate. Dark Shadow hit it once, causing the piece fly out and many meters away. All three of them squinted their eyes at the brightness of the outer dome as Dark Shadow shrunk to his normal daytime size. Izuku checked their surroundings for ambushes just in case some of Tamura's forces were smarter than the rest. No one came after them. They had exited the storm dome near the miniature lake. On their right side ahead of them a wide path to the central plaza, and to the left some greenery and trees before the giant staircase to the entrance platform far above. There were still people there. There weren't supposed to be people there. Had something happened to Kurogiri? Izuku blinked as he recognized one large six-armed person up there. If Shoji hadn't been transported, what about Tinya and Kirishima? There were more people up there, but Izuku couldn't identify either of those two among them, and there was no sign of All Might. Still, Izuku could hear sounds of fighting coming from the central square. If All Might hadn't shown up, why was the League even still there? What was Tamura doing? Izuku had a hunch about that, and it sent shivers down his spine. He glanced up again. If there were multiple students still up there, they were probably relatively safe as long as battles raged on the lower parts of the dome. These trees will give us cover to reach the stairs, Tokoyami said. True, Hitachi said hesitantly and glanced at Izuku, but what about everyone else? We survived our trap, but others are still in danger. I don't know if I can just turn my back and escape. The teachers would want us to get to the exit, Tokoyami said. These are real villains, and we are still students. Yes, but if we want to be heroes, we cannot just leave people behind in the middle of this, even if it is dangerous. Izuku was so proud of Hitachi at that moment, and worried, proud and worried, and terrified, yes, definitely terrified. Toshi, you do understand how dangerous that would be? They came here to kill All Might. That means they have people or something they think is enough to defeat him. Still, do you think it is wise? Tokoyami asked. I think it's the right thing to do. We should at least see if there is something we can do. It is, Izuku said after a few seconds. We can follow the tree line to the central square. That way we can have an escape route or keep one open for others. Stay close. They proceeded alongside the edge of the greenery. The sounds and shouts of battle had waned away. There was a wall between them and the central square, but Dark Shadow carried them over it quickly, dropping them behind nearest trees. As Izuku peeked, he could see Tamura and the Nomu that was sitting on downed Izawa. The teacher's arms were broken, reminding Izuku of his own painful encounters with the creature. As a hero, the man was their enemy and Izuku didn't exactly like him, but seeing the pure brutality inflicted on him made Izuku sick. Behind him Hitachi gagged. The only relief Izuku felt was that of Kurogiri appearing next to Tamura seemingly unharmed. Tamura Shigaraki, the much nicer Nomu, started. Kurogiri, did you manage to kill 13? The rescue hero is out of commission, but there were students I wasn't able to disperse and one of them got outside of the facility. Tamura turned to Kurogiri surprised and then brought his hand up to scratch his own neck with increasing intensity, soon bringing his other hand up too. Izuku's entire being tensed. He knew what Tomura was literally itching for. "Kurogiri, you fool. If you weren't our warp gate, I'd tear apart every last atom of your body." Not if Izuku had something to say about that. Suddenly Tomura stopped. "There is no way we can win if dozens of pros show up to stop us. It's game over, back to the title screen, and I was looking forward to finishing this today. Damn it. Let's go home." Was Tomura actually making the sensible choice and leaving? "Oh, before we leave, let's make sure the symbol of peace is broken," Tomura said and turned to look towards the edge of the mini lake. Izuku realized there were people in the water trying to hide behind the edge between ground and water. "Let's wreck his pride," Tomura said and dashed towards the water few meters at such speed it surprised even Izuku. "Let's make this hurt." The students in the water jolted back revealing themselves as Uraraka and Kaminari, but they were too slow. Izuku didn't hold Kaminari in very high value but could barely resist looking away as Tomura reached for Uraraka's head. He touched her with all 5 fingers. Izuku held his breath. Nothing happened. Tomura turned his head. "You really are so cool." Even with broken arms and held down by the Nomu, Aizawa was still staring at Tomura with one eye to erase his quirk. "Eraserhead," Tomura finished, and as if on K the Nomu pulled Aizawa's head up and smashed it on the ground. "Maybe we should take you if we can't have All Might. I'm sure Sensei and my brother would like to study your quirk, then again." Tomura turned back around moving towards Uraraka who tried to waddle away. He jumped back just in time to avoid Dark Shadow. Despite Dark Shadow's speed and benefit of surprise he failed to catch Tomura, and by the time Dark Shadow turned to attack again. "Nomu!" Tomura shouted, and before anyone could know what was going on the large Nomu loomed over Dark Shadow who withdrew as quickly as he had attacked. Tomura's eyes followed the quirk murder in his gaze until it met the trio coming from the storm dome. "Nomuke!" He noticed Izuku who had inched in front of Hitachi and Tokoyami, and the two brothers' eyes met. While Tomura's eyes were full of rage, both of them knew he could rely neither on the large Nomu nor Kurogiri if he wanted to oppose Izuku. Izuku might have lacked the power to stop the Nomu or protect Hitachi in battle, but that just meant he would have had no choice but to order the Nomu. Not a single Nomu had yet to refuse his commands, and both of them knew it. Tomura started scratching himself with even more fiercely than before. Izuku glanced at Kurogiri nearby. Kurogiri looked at him for a moment and then in his misty form floated over the ground to Tomura. "Tomura Shigaraki. It is time to leave. Waiting will only cause unnecessary risk." "Fine, but this isn't over. We should take the teacher as you proposed." Tomura scratched himself a little harder. "Whatever, just open a warp G." There was a loud boom and a dust cloud spread out from the entrance above. Everything stopped as everyone turned to look what was going on. A few seconds later a familiar oversized man appeared at the top of the stairs. All Might had arrived. "Ah, looks like our game is getting to continue," Tomura said. And Izuku wasn't sure whether to be happy or not. On one hand they still had a chance to succeed at taking down the so-called symbol of peace. On the other hand this whole farce had been seconds from being over, and if All Might had come from outside fully ready for battle, that meant others already knew what was going on and more heroes would soon arrive. The window of time for Tomura to take him down was. All Might stopped next to Izuku with Kaminari, Uraraka and unconscious Aizawa. Tomura's remaining thugs in the area were already unconscious, but some of them hadn't yet had time to fall on the ground. Izuku was frozen still facing up towards the entrance as he was too stunned to even turn to see All Might next to him. He hadn't even been able to follow the man when he moved. After all that training, getting his bones broken by Nomus and honing his instincts dodging air blasts, he couldn't even properly follow All Might's movements. Sure, he had already had similar experiences with the large Nomu, but this was still something else. Despite his analytic tendencies and childhood fanboying, he had never actually witnessed All Might's power in person. If he knew about Izuku's real loyalties, All Might could crush his bones at least as easily as the Nomu had done, and Izuku wouldn't even have time to realize it was happening. Whatever hopes he had had that the plan might yet succeed cracked and crumbled like Tomura had touched them, even with all the tactics they had come up for this battle. What the heck, Hitachi gasped. Everybody back to the entrance and take Aizawa with you. He doesn't have much time, All Might commanded. He glanced at Izuku, who was still turning to stare at him. No, 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 Tomura muttered nearby, holding one of his own hands in place of one that had fallen off his face. It wasn't supposed to go this way. He's still fast, father. Somehow he managed to hit me. Tomura slouched to his fallen face hand to pick it up. Of course, government hero relies on violence. I wasn't prepared. I couldn't even see him when he moved. But he is not as fast as I thought he would be, not as fast as he used to be. I guess it is true after all. All Might really is getting weaker. Midoriya kept an eye on his deranged adoptive brother as he pulled Aizawa on his shoulders, very carefully and aware of the agony even slightest motion of a broken arm could cause. Sir, Tokoyami said, the villains came here planning to kill you. That large creature seems to be the strongest one and faster than Dark Shadow. All Might showed them thumbs up. Young Tokoyami, I got this. Tokoyami stood there for a few seconds and nodded. He followed Izuku and Hitachi, who carried Aizawa. All Might charged at Tomura but was blocked by the Nomu moving in the way instantly. All Might's strike did nothing. Same happened with follow-up punches, even though winds they generated ruffled Izuku's hair. It gave back some of his confidence in the Nomu. Soon All Might grabbed the Nomu by the waist and pulled. When the Nomu's head hit the ground, there was a large explosion-like burst of dust as the ground shook. Tokoyami and Hitachi stopped to look, but Izuku walked a little faster, effectively using Aizawa to pull Hitachi along. Anything that got them safe sooner. The battle going on was too much for them, and Izuku wasn't about to let Hitachi become a hostage even if it would help defeat All Might. As the dust cleared, Hitachi and Tokoyami gasped. The Nomu's topside had gone through a warp gate on the ground and come up from another right next to it under All Might. Now it wasn't just All Might holding the Nomu, but the other way around, with Kurogiri looming over them. They were going for Izuku's gate slicer idea, but the Nomu pulled All Might too deep to only cut legs and take him alive to father. It looked like they were going to cut him in half from the waist. The students could only stare as the Nomu started pulling All Might into the warp gate. I cannot believe such a dark creature exists that it can overpower All Might, Tokoyami said. He might actually die, Hitachi added, and half turned towards the battle. Don't, you can't do anything to that thing, Izuku said. No, and I doubt my quirks would work on it. Right, Izuku said, wishing Aizawa wasn't hanging from his shoulders right then. Right, but that thing hasn't done anything unless that Tomura guy told it to. Izuku just stared at Hitachi, hoping his fear wasn't true. I know you are worried, and don't like All Might, but... Hitachi dropped Aizawa's legs, turned, and ran back towards the battle. Izuku tossed Aizawa off his shoulders like the man was just a large pillow. Dark Shadow was just fast enough to catch him. Kurogiri emerged right in front of Hitachi with a warp gate already forming between them. Hitachi jolted, probably too surprised to activate the brainwashing. Kurogiri wasn't going to outright kill Hitachi. Izuku knew that, but he wasn't about. The next question was now what? Kurogiri couldn't harm him and he wouldn't harm Kurogiri. All of which did not apply to Tomura. What's wrong? Can't stop a couple of kids without sending lackeys to do your job. To be fair, it would probably have worked and saved All Might if Tomura wasn't well informed on Hitachi's quirks. Izuku wasn't sure if that was good to ensure All Might's defeat or... Toshi, don't try anything, he told Tomura, trying not to say anything condemning. I won't let you hurt him. Tomura actually stopped and both his hands rose to scratch his neck. They stopped halfway when one side of the large Nomu, including leg and arm, suddenly froze. Nearby Todoroki, one of your poorly trained thugs told me you are here because you think you can kill All Might, Todoroki told Tomura with a calm arrogance as if he wasn't in the middle of a massive villain attack. Tomura didn't have time to address that situation before he had to jump to dodge the sharp-edged fist of a familiar redhead. Kurogiri sunk into the ground in front of Izuku and the ice ended just before the Nomu's fingers easing its hold enough for All Might to pry himself free. He was also standing his back to, but the overwhelming power and speed All Might had demonstrated before. The distance between them may not have been more than 2 meters, but with such speed it was still too much. Are you unhurt? All Might asked and glanced at the two students. Izuku jolted and blinked back into the situation at hand. We are fine, Hitachi said quickly as Todoroki and Kirishima joined them. Kirishima was breathing hard and leaned against his knees. One side of his pants were torn off up to his knees, and other than his shoes that was all that was left. The shoulder pads around his arms and his strange face mask were completely gone. Surprisingly, or in Kirishima's case perhaps not, he didn't seem to have visible injuries. Are you okay? Izuku asked this time. Yeah, He drew deep breath. That mist guy sent me somewhere with a lot more villains. It was an exhausting fight. How about others? Izuku asked, barely holding back from outright asking about Tenya. Or, were you with Todoroki? No, I was only one there. Were you together, Lucky? Wait. Hitachi said. You two were sent against a crowd of villains, and you were alone, and you beat them. Heh, I guess. It was hard fight, but I really expected them to be tougher than that to attack you, eh? Izuku, Hitachi whispered. I think you might have found a punching bag that can take you. Focus Toshi, Izuku responded without letting Tomura out of his sight. His adoptive brother was already muttering. They escaped uninjured and captured my strongest asset. Kids these days really are amazing. They make the League of Villains look like amateurs. Can't have that. Nomu. The Nomu screeched and started pulling itself up despite being frozen solid. As it got out of Kurogiri's warp gate, frozen pieces started breaking off, unable to flex with the motion. It was time for the creature's next surprise. Last of the ice shattered as bare flesh and muscle twisted and bulged, and they began to grow out into new limbs, ones without the scars Izuku had left in training. What is this? I thought you said its power was shock absorption. All Might said. I didn't say that was his only quirk. He also has super regeneration. Nomu has been modified to take you on even at 100% of your power. He is basically a highly efficient punching bag that hits back. Izuku had to pretend most of his shock for the regeneration, but hiding his annoyance at the monologuing Tomura was just as difficult. Was he going to give All Might address to his hideout next? Izuku especially wasn't excited at Tomura highlighting the multi-quirk nature of the Nomu. We've got them outnumbered, Todoroki said. These guys might act really though, but we can take them down now with All Might's help, Kirishima said and hardened his arms ready to fight. Let's do this. Don't attack, All Might commanded as he walked forward and held his arm in front of them. Get out of here. You would have been in trouble earlier if it weren't for me, remember, Todoroki said. You need our help. I thank you for your assistance, but this is different. It's going to be all right. Just sit back and watch a pro at work. He gave them a thumbs up. He was clearly pretending to be more certain than he was, but after all that Izuku had witnessed so far, he with all his analytic ability was at loss. Do as I ordered. The rest isn't your concern. Let's clear this level and go home. Heads up, we are fighting after all, Kirishima said and hardened again. All Might moved to counter Tomura and was met by the Nomu. The first meeting of their fists created a shockwave that blew Tomura away and pushed Izuku's group back. As All Might sped up to throw punches faster than a normal human eye could follow, the air pressure got too much. Izuku fell on his knees and sunk his dragon blade on the ground to not be blown back. Kirishima did the same, punching a hardened arm into the ground as Todoroki braced himself against a wall of ice. Hitachi slid past Izuku until he dragged his arm guards against the ground long enough to stop him flat against the ground. Izuku could turn his attention back to the fight. All Might's barrage of punches was actually pushing the Nomu back as the very ground shattered around them. With a massive punch, the Nomu got launched through the forested area and All Might leaped after it. As the two charged at each other again, the battle actually moved mid-air briefly, hitting the ground several times with concrete shattering force, until All Might grabbed the Nomu and threw it back onto the ground with enough force to create a crater, launching chunks of stone everywhere. Izuku lit another dragon blade as a shield to protect his head. All Might landed next to where the Nomu was bouncing back up. Now for a lesson, you may have heard these words before, All Might declared, but instead of a ridiculously fast barrage like before, All Might only threw one ridiculously powerful punch which shockwave exceeded the previous ones, shaking the whole facility. The Nomu was launched like an artillery shell, barely a blur and explosion as it bust through the dome and out into the sky. Izuku could only stare at the hole in the dome until his eyes slowly descended to the man who did all that. How strong had he been in his heyday? Izuku was more amazed than ever that his father was still alive, even knowing his power. All Might turned to face Tomura and Kurogiri. You have been bested villains. Surrender. We all want this over with quickly. Tomura simply stared at All Might and brought a hand up to scratch his neck. Fanfiction, unleash your imagination. It had all gone to hell, and more times than once. The Nomu was gone, with All Might and all his overwhelming power now facing Tomura and Kurogiri. Izuku gulped and moved closer behind All Might, uncertain of what he himself was going to do. Tomura and Kurogiri should just have escaped, assuming it was even possible anymore, with nothing to stop All Might from getting in their way. Maybe there was something Izuku could help with. He wasn't about to let Kurogiri be caught, and he wasn't too excited about the idea of Tomura's scratching slowed down and he glanced at Izuku just before Izuku got into the dust or steam cloud around All Might. The last thing Izuku did before losing sight was to silently mouth the word escape. What's wrong? Not attacking me? Didn't you say you were going to clear this level earlier? Well, come and get me. If only. You must be kidding. I don't care what he wants. I lead this league. You can go back to playing babysitter after we finish off All Might. Izuku had to fight the urge to face Palm. And Tomura complained about him talking carelessly. In either case, it was too late to worry about it. Izuku could already hear Tomura running at All Might straight from the front. Izuku bit his teeth together and ran towards All Might's back. It was all or nothing. Even if they succeeded, Izuku's life as he knew it would be over. He wouldn't even have the chance to say goodbye to Tenya and Hitachi or thank them. A gunshot echoed in the dome, accompanied by a gasp of pain from Tomura and several other sounds of gunfire. Izuku ground to a halt. I have returned. I have fulfilled my duty. Izuku would have recognized Tenya's voice anywhere, even from a distance in the middle of a battle. One of the many weights on his shoulders disappeared. And I have brought reinforcements. More shouts and gunfire filled the area. Many of the knocked out villains had to have recovered. A few seconds later, Izuku slapped his hands on his ears as a literal Izuku was only a few steps from All Might, but it was too late to do anything but hope Kurogiri was able to take himself and Tomura away safely and watch the dust settle, literally. All Might's form in front of his got clearer by the second. Izuku's shoulders slumped, and he was about to turn away to join rest of the students until he blinked. Midoriya, All Might said and looked around. Please, I will explain later. Don't tell anyone what you saw. Izuku did not respond, only able to stare. All Might was losing his power. If they had had a few more seconds, Tomura might have been able to kill him. The way the man looked, Izuku could have most likely finished him right there and then, but if All Might was that weak, did that mean something had happened to One for All? Had he already given it away? As much as Izuku hated the man, he couldn't break his cover to kill him if he didn't even have his quirk anymore. Whether he still had it or not, later. All Might, Izuku said, and ran out of the dissipating cloud. It took him only a few seconds to locate Hitachi a lot further away from where he used to be. One of the clones of the pro-hero Ectoplasm was standing next to him, helping him up, but Hitachi was leaned forward and holding his side. He tried to take a step but jolted from pain and almost fell, being held up by Ectoplasm. Izuku cursed himself for not paying attention. A wall of concrete emerged between him and All Might. "For your own safety, please stay back, young man," Cementos, another one of the pro-hero teachers, said. "Join your classmates at the front gate. Leave the injured to us. We can take care of them." As if Izuku was going to do that. He was running before the hero stopped speaking. "Toshi. Yeah, well, mostly. One of those shock." "Izuku, stop BL, whoa." Hitachi didn't even have time to argue, when Izuku crouched in front of him and in a few seconds pulled him over his shoulders onto a fireman's carry. Izuku glanced at Ectoplasm as he got up. If eyes could talk, his would have said, "Back off, I'm not going to trust him with you." Not caring about the hero's opinion, Izuku was running before Ectoplasm could say anything. "Izuku, don't you think this is a bit much?" Hitachi asked. "I saw you trying to take a step. You want to try walking up those stairs?" "Point taken, but are you going to do that while carrying me, after all that fighting?" Izuku didn't say anything, and a few moments later Hitachi sighed in defeat. "Well, could be worse. I prefer." Overly concerned Izuku over self-blaming Izuku. "I saw your arm guards weren't enough to hold on. I should have." "Izuku, if you start, I swear I will brainwash you to leave helping me to All Might." "Traitor. It's for your own good." "Hey Midoriya." Kirishima called from the bottom of the stairs. "Hopefully it's minor," Izuku said. "Seems All Might forgot not everyone is as invulnerable as him when he threw that thing on the ground next to his students." "Izuku," Hitachi sighed quietly enough that only Izuku heard. They started ascending the stairs. "Need help carrying him up?" Kirishima asked and flexed his arm. "No, and I think you are the more exhausted one out of us." "Can't deny that. Do you think everyone else is okay?" "I fear not, but everyone I've seen so far has done better than I imagined, so, maybe. I hope so. A lot of them seem to be up there already, and the teachers are going to rescue the rest." Izuku focused on the top of the staircase, relieved to see Tinya looking down towards them. All Might was. "Stop it," Izuku said. "If I can't blame myself, I'm not going to let you do it." "And what are you going to do about it?" "I am pretty confident Recovery Girl will get you fixed by tomorrow, for training. If you think you aren't progressing fast enough, we can always try to fix that." Hitachi gulped, and 2 other ambulances departed, sirens screaming to carry 13 and Aizawa to a hospital. Izuku didn't know how to feel about that, especially about Aizawa. Whatever side he was on, part of Izuku couldn't help but respect the fierce fight the man had fought to protect his students even when outnumbered and outmatched. He had done exactly what Izuku had expected from the heroes that failed his mother, maybe more, and his only quirk was to turn a battle into a quirkless one. "They really showed us what real heroes do," Tinya commented behind Izuku. "That mist guy got 13 bad, and even after that she helped me see past my misguided ideas of honor and do what was best for everyone." "You had something to do with the teachers coming when they did," Izuku said. "It wasn't even a question. I got out thanks to our classmates and ran back to the main campus." Izuku was impressed Tinya had gotten past Kurogiri. Even with help it was impressive, but he couldn't say anything about it. "You didn't get taken away by the mist guy?" "It was close. I and Shoji managed to grab a couple of our classmates before we got taken." After that 13 got taken out, but she told me to get out to get help. The mist guy almost got me too. If you hadn't made me focus. They hung out at the ambulance while the paramedics checked Hitachi. Other students came out of the USJ Dome a couple at a time but didn't have any serious injuries. The only ones being brought to the ambulances were villains in handcuffs that had taken part in the attack. Izuku recognized some faces from the times he had either tagged along for Tomura's recruitment drives or simply looked into what kind of people they had. He had never been so grateful for his helmet. Then they brought out the man whose quirk Izuku had stolen. He was conscious but staggering, needing to be supported by the police officers escorting him. So that was one quirk Izuku was not interested in getting. What is up with him? Vlad King asked and followed the man's stare right to Izuku. Izuku met their gazes if only for a moment, turned around and opened his costume, pulling it down enough to reveal his upper back now with two slight. See. He took it? Give it back. You took another quirk? Tinya asked. Izuku pulled his costume back on. Yeah. Izuku said, give it back. Why would I? Izuku said, not even looking at the screaming man. He can't take it back. Even if he tries through courts, didn't I mention he tried to kill us? Would be a shame if I had to push for the maximum sentence. I assume the school has no problem. Izuku tilted his head to look at Vlad King, who had come closer and had been joined by Principal Nizu. As long as the situation is settled in a legal manner, the school has no problem with your actions on this matter. Of course, that assumes you use the power responsibly as long as you might have it. Do you have anything to add, Detective? Izuku blinked and looked to the side. He barely stopped himself from showing recognition of the man dressed in a long light brown jacket that he only knew from pictures after his father's warning. Izuku slightly tugged on the calm mind quirk within himself as he came face to face with Detective Tsukachi. I don't think there are any precedents I could comment. I don't think anything is broken or seriously damaged, the medic responded and looked at Hitachi. I'll get you something for the pain, but if your classmates help you to the bus, I think your school nurse can handle the rest. No worries. It would be impossible to stop them from helping. It warms my heart to see students supporting each other, Nizu said. If everyone is okay, I'd like all of you to gather with your classmates, unless the detective needs to talk to you about anything. If he hadn't already activated the calm mind a little bit, Izuku might have tensed just enough for someone like Nizu of Tsukachi himself to notice. I don't think that will be necessary. We will interview all of the students about this incident, of course, but this isn't the best time for that. If everything is okay here, I need to help with restraining the villains. The man lifted his large hat and walked past them. At least they weren't as blatant as trying to get one over on Izuku right after a large. Tinya, Hitachi said, help me up before Izuku forgets I'm not a sack of rice. Not a sack, more like a little bag, Izuku teased. Thank you. You are a real master of motivational speeches, Hitachi responded. Anything for my friends. To be fair, Izuku still wants to bulk up too. We should all get stronger, although, Izuku glanced back, trying to see the bumps of the jets that had formed behind his shoulders. I might need your help with controlling my movements with this quirk, Tinya. I'd be happy to work with you on that, although, while I haven't yet seen how the quirk works, I think it might be more similar to my brother's engines since both quirks are on your upper bodies. They do seem similar actually, Izuku admitted. By the way, are you going to help Toshi up, or do I have to carry your bag of rice? Right, sorry, Tinya said quickly and moved to support Hitachi in getting up, and they went to join the rest of their class and board the bus. Most of their classmates seemed relieved and tired. Kaminari stared into nothingness with a stupid expression on his face. Kirishima was slouched against his seat. If he really beat the group of villains that had been prepared for Tinya and Shoji, all by himself, he had more than deserved his rest. Whether that made him a powerful ally or a major threat, Izuku didn't want to think about. Ajiro glanced at Izuku nervously and inched closer to the window as the trio settled in front of him. Izuku would have preferred the back seats, but the open-plan front area was easier for Hitachi to get to. Several others gave Izuku looks that weren't as bad, but they obviously knew what had happened. Izuku reached back to scratch the newly morphed part of his body. At least they stayed pretty flat when he wasn't using them, not really visible under regular clothes. "Hey, Midoriya, Shinso!" Dark Shadow shouted, appearing from within Tokoyami, opposite to the trio on the bus. "Fumi was really worried for you. Don't do stupid things like that." Tinya looked at the quirk creature and Izuku, one after the other. "Did something happen between you? Didn't Dark Shadow hate you before? If I hated someone for no reason and that someone saved your life, do you think I would still hate them after that?" Izuku responded. "No, you'd probably buy them a house." "House?" Dark Shadow asked and looked at Tokoyami. "Can we do that?" "No. Just a little one. He saved you." Tokoyami closed his eyes and muttered something too quietly to hear as the bus got going. "Speaking of houses, Kirishima," Izuku said, getting the redhead to look up at him, "do you think you'll be okay to train at my place tomorrow, or will you need the day to rest?" I guess. I might be really sore, unless Recovery Girl can fix that too." "The more reason you should come," Hitachi said. "Izuku's house has great baths. Can't think of anything better for sore muscles." "Sounds good," Kirishima responded and rotated his shoulder. The rest of the afternoon went by pretty uneventfully. They arrived back at the main campus. Izuku loomed over Recovery Girl as she healed Hitachi, and then they waited in their classroom until Nizu came to tell them they could go home, saying all of them would see the school counselor and a detective during the next week. Thankfully for Izuku they didn't call parents to pick them up, though the school seemed to take the students' traumatic experience a bit too lightly. For once Izuku didn't feel like criticizing the school. He just got into his car and collapsed on the seat between Hitachi and Tinya. At least they were both okay. With Recovery Girl's treatment, even Hitachi no longer showed any signs of injury. Not everyone was that lucky though. After making sure the two got home safely, Izuku walked down to his basement where Kurogiri was already waiting for him and opened a warp gate. Izuku looked at the Nomu before stepping through. "Are you okay? I didn't see you get hurt at USJ." "I am unharmed, young Shigaraki, but I cannot say the same for your brother. Be careful." Izuku gulped. Kurogiri wouldn't say that without reason. "Thank you," Izuku said and stepped into the warp gate. He emerged into the medical room he had become intimately familiar with before receiving the regeneration quirk. Tomura was laying on the bed in hospital garbs and with heavy bandaging on his arm and legs. At least he was healthy, or angry enough to rise to a sitting position as Izuku arrived. You dare show your face here after helping the heroes. Because of you All Might still lives." Tomura's outburst was loud enough that Izuku took a few seconds to respond while Tomura continued. "You put your little friends ahead of destroying the symbol of peace and now the League has been decimated. And you think it is my fault?" Izuku scoffed. "Your League," Izuku emphasized, "got beaten up by fresh first-year students. Kirishima alone beat the group that was supposed to keep 3 people busy." "Kurogiri," Izuku hesitated. "Some of the students were capable enough to get one of them outside. The Nomu couldn't beat All Might, and heroes arrived before you had, and never threaten Kurogiri again, unless you would like to be quirkless from now on," Izuku added. The Misty Nomu moved his head slightly, but he was as expressionless as ever. Their father chuckled nearby, where he was sitting by a computer. "Interesting, you think Tomura would have defeated All Might himself with more time. He can be destructive, but if that was enough to kill All Might we would not have needed the Nomu." "I thought the same," Izuku said and looked down. "I have never actually seen All Might's power firsthand. When I did, I lost hope we could win even though Tomura still had the Nomu then, but at the end. I snuck into the dust cloud behind All Might after the Nomu was defeated, to be close at hand in case I needed to step in and help Tomura and Kurogiri. I was there when the heroes arrived. I saw All Might, but he wasn't himself. Almost as soon as Tomura and Kurogiri left he started shrinking. He became skinny and sickly looking, like his power had simply left him. Tomura could definitely have defeated him in that state, but Izuku looked up again. He might not even have One for All anymore, and I have no idea who he might have given it to. His father brought his hand up to his cheek, just like Izuku tended to do when deep in thought. Considering the injuries I gave him, I wouldn't be surprised if his ability to use One for All was waning anyway, but that would be a reason to finally find a successor. Losing his ability to be a hero might be the only thing that could push All Might to pass on the quirk. That would be both a good and bad thing for us. On one hand, we do not know who has the quirk. At the same time, the inheritor would be less experienced with One for All and would be an easier target. Besides making them easier to defeat, it might make taking the quirk easier, and if you are correct about All Might's state, then his defeat is only a matter of time. We only need to push him to his limits first. It might not be that easy, Izuku said. It wasn't just the Nomua. I saw news about him stopping many crimes during the morning before fighting the Nomua. I didn't say it would be easy, his father said, and we need to find out who has the quirk first. Izuku, you might need to get closer to All Might and be friendly with him. Izuku pressed his lips together, trying not to groan. Eventually he gave up and let out an unhappy sigh. I doubt I could avoid talking to him anyway. All Might noticed that I saw him. I didn't give him much time to talk, but I bet he'll try to talk to me on Monday, if not before. So, you are already ahead on that, good. Tomura. The seething man turned his head at hearing his name. Today was a failure, but not the end. Take all the time you need to recover and rebuild the league. Make it stronger, with people worthy of joining you who will follow you through all that needs to be done. I will continue to support you, but you must be able to lead on your own. Tomura muttered something incomprehensible and let himself fall back to a laying position. Izuku, their father continued, keep doing what you have been doing. We need to know if All Might has passed on One for All or not, and to whom. I know this might be especially hard for you, but you need to control your feelings about him. I know. Thankfully I have calm mind for that. His father nodded. Never forget why you are doing this. The better world you want cannot come to be while the so-called symbol of peace exists to hold up the current one, be it All Might or his successor. I know, I'll do it, but I would rather fight another Nomua. That can be arranged, his father said, but I would prefer if you got the previous one back. From Tomura's and Kurogiri's report, it sounds like the Nomu is likely still alive, either somewhere out of sight or captured by the heroes and police. It lacks the intelligence to resist capture on its own. Tomura will need time to recover, so I will count on you to release it. All might know what happened to it, or his police friend. So, I need to get information about it from them and then break in wherever it is being held to bring it back. Yes, consider it your first major mission that you are in charge of, besides spying on UA. This is a mission for Shirakuro, not Izuku. If you need something you can request it, but I want to see you handle things and make decisions yourself. I believe you are more than ready for this. Izuku opened his mouth to make a request. You can have Kurogiri to help, of course. Izuku closed his mouth, the request rendered pointless. You have trained hard and gained new quirks that Izuku Midoriya can use, but you lack real experience, especially from the dark side of this society. Which reminds me. How do you feel about the new quirk? Izuku glanced over his shoulder even though he couldn't see the jets morphed into his back. I haven't had a chance to test it, but after the initial pain I haven't noticed many negative effects. Your body is starting to adjust to new quirks faster now that you have been getting them more often, but you can use most of them only as Midoriya the hero student. Do you feel up to a challenge? What kind of challenge? You have practiced suppressing quirks with your regeneration, but now with the shoulder-mounted jets it is even more critical to not be exposed by a clear mutation. I have a quirk that could be extremely useful to you as Shirakuro, but being able to suppress its effects constantly when you don't want to use it is critical. The person who was originally born with this quirk begged me to take it away, offering everything he owned in exchange, and became my loyal follower for the rest of his life when I did. Izuku gulped. I'm not sure. I haven't even really trained with all of my previous quirks. What is the quirk like? It is called Killing Intent, his father responded, and if you have read manga, you should be able to figure out most of its effects. Essentially it makes people believe you are about to kill them. The effect can vary from unease to paralyzing terror depending on how convinced they are of your ability to do so, and some other factors. Used correctly, people don't even realize they are being impacted by a quirk. And the quirk is always active? Izuku asked. The original owner was never able to fully suppress it, but with All for One it is quite easy to control. I can see why he wanted to get rid of it. A quirk people fear is bad enough. One that literally makes people fear you. You must have saved his life. Too bad he already died. You shouldn't feel bad about that part. I think he would be about 100 years old if he still lived. Right, Izuku said. I always forget how old you are. Watch your words, young man.
That means he's